She's just an analyst. Keep her out of my way. Major Reynolds threw the classified folder across the briefing table without looking at her once. Around him, 12 elite operators laughed quietly. Nobody looked at the woman in the corner. Nobody saw her hands completely still, completely calm, the hands of someone who had already put a bullet through a target at 800 meters in a blizzard before Reynolds ever had his first command. That night on a mountain in Colorado, when the sniper was down, when the machine gun was tearing his team apart, when every operator was out of options, the woman nobody looked at picked up the rifle and eliminated 88 targets in 11 minutes. Now drop a comment. What city are you watching from? Subscribe and follow this story to the end. She had learned a long time ago that being underestimated was not a weakness. It was a weapon. Emily Carter understood this the way most people understand the back of their own hand, intimately, quietly, without ever needing to explain it to anyone. She had been carrying that understanding since the day she walked into her first military evaluation and watched 3 male instructors exchange a glance that said everything without saying a word. They thought she was lost. They thought she had wandered into the wrong building. She had scored higher than every man in that room by the end of the first week. But that was years ago now. A different life, a different version of Emily Carter, who wore different clothes and answered to different orders and carried a rifle instead of a tablet loaded with satellite reconnaissance imagery. The Emily Carter, who walked into the Task Force Sentinel briefing room at Fort Liberty on a Tuesday morning in February, was officially on paper a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst. Her badge said so, her file said so, the lanyard around her neck said so. She wore civilian clothes, dark blue slacks, a gray fleece boots that were more practical than fashionable, and she carried a laptop bag over one shoulder and a thermos of black coffee in her left hand. She looked exactly like what everyone in that room assumed she was. Harmless, useful only in the narrow, limited way that people behind computers are useful. Someone to read the maps so the real warriors didn't have to. She found her seat near the back of the room, set her laptop on the table and opened it without fanfare. Around her, the members of Task Force Sentinel, they filled in men with a particular kind of quiet confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from experience. These were not young soldiers still working something out. These were operators, special forces, rangers, men who had been in places that don't appear on the news and done things that don't appear in any report Emily had ever been allowed to read in full. She recognized faces she had only seen in personnel files. Staff Sergeant Brian Kowalski, who had lost 2 fingers on his left hand during a hostage recovery in Central America 3 years ago and had somehow convinced his medical board to let him stay on active status. Corporal Danny Tran, 26 years old, the youngest member of the team who moved like a man twice his experience level. Master Sergeant James Okafor, who had the reputation for being the calmest human being under fire that anyone who served with him had ever encountered, the kind of calm that wasn't the absence of fear, but was instead what happened when you had made peace with it so many times that it no longer had any power over you. And then at the front of the room, Major Daniel Reynolds. Emily had read his file 3 times before this morning. She believed in knowing the people she would be working alongside. Reynolds was 41 years old, 18 years of service, 4 combat deployments, 2 commendations, 1 letter of reprimand from 6 years ago that his file said was related to an unauthorized deviation from operational protocol, the kind of language that could mean anything from minor insubordination to saving lives in a way nobody wanted to officially acknowledge. I was 6'2", dark hair cut close, a jaw that looked like it had been assembled specifically to communicate authority. When he walked into the room, the temperature changed slightly, not because of any dramatic entrance, but simply because everyone in the room straightened a fraction of an inch without realizing they were doing it. He glanced at Emily exactly once when he entered, a single sweeping glance that placed her in a category and moved on. She had seen that glance before. She knew exactly what it meant. It meant noted, filed, irrelevant. Reynolds moved to the front of the room, picked up a remote, and pulled up the mission overview on the projection screen behind him. Task Force Sentinel, listen up. His voice was controlled, practiced, not loud, but absolutely filling every corner of the room. You've all received the preliminary briefing. Tonight I want to walk through the specifics, address contingencies, and make sure every person in this room understands their role before we insert. He clicked through to the satellite image, an aerial photograph of a mountain complex in the Rockies, a cluster of old concrete buildings partly buried under snow, surrounded by tree line on 3 sides and open ground on the 4th. "This is the Kessler facility," Reynolds said. "Decommissioned Army Corps training complex. Officially abandoned. Unofficially, for the past 4 months, it has been the operational base for a domestic extremist network calling themselves Iron Covenant. NSA intercepts have placed their leadership, specifically their primary organizer, a former military logistics contractor named Marcus Webb, inside this facility within the last 72 hours. He clicked again. A personnel photograph appeared. Marcus Webb looked ordinary in the way that made Emily's skin prickle. He was in his mid-50s with reading glasses and the soft, rounded face of someone who spent his days behind a desk. He could have been an accountant. He could have been someone's grandfather. He was instead the man who had built a network capable of stealing classified military weapons data and moving it through a supply chain that Emily had spent 6 weeks trying to fully map. She had not yet fully mapped it. That bothered her more than she let show. Primary objectives, Reynolds continued, clicking to the next slide. 1. Capture Marcus Webb alive. 2. Recover or destroy the classified weapons data believed to be stored at this location. 3. Exfil before 0400. "We have a weather window. We will use it." He set the remote down and looked at the room. "Questions so far?" Okafor raised his hand slightly. "ROE. Capture preferred on all contacts. Lethal force authorized if capture is not achievable and team safety is at risk." "How many personnel are we expecting inside the facility?" "Intelligence has assessed somewhere between 8 and 15 fighters. Majority former military. Training levels are inconsistent. Some of these people are serious. Some are enthusiasts who watch too many videos online. We do not have specific positions for all of them." He clicked to the next slide, a breakdown of the insertion plan approach. Routes, entry points, rally positions. Emily studied it carefully. Something pulled at the edge of her attention, the way a thread sticking out of a sweater pulls at your fingers without you consciously deciding to reach for it. She couldn't name it yet, but it was there. After Reynolds finished walking through the primary plan, he moved to secondary contingencies, alternate extraction routes, communications protocols, medical procedures. He covered everything with the precision of someone who had given briefings like this many times and knew that the briefings you gave in warm, safe rooms were the difference between people coming home and people not coming home. He was almost done when he looked toward the back of the room and said, "Carter." Emily looked up from her laptop. "You're assigned to the command element. You stay with me and Sergeant Okafor throughout the operation. Your job is to provide real-time intelligence support. You relay anything coming through the intercept network. You flag any changes in the intelligence picture, and you stay close enough to the command position to be useful without getting in the way of the operators." He said it plainly, not cruelly, not dismissively, just factually, the way you explain to someone the rules of a game they've never played. But the sentence structure said everything. Stay close enough to be useful. Don't get in the way of the operators. The implied hierarchy was so natural to him that he probably didn't even notice he'd stated it. Emily nodded. "Understood, Major. Do you have any questions about your role?" "No." He nodded and moved on. Kowalski leaned toward Tran and said something quietly, and Tran smiled slightly. Emily didn't try to hear what it was. She could imagine it well enough. After the briefing broke and operators began filing out to prep their gear, Emily stayed seated and looked again at the satellite image still displayed on the screen. The thread was still pulling at her. She pulled up her own satellite archive on her laptop imagery, going back 6 weeks over the Kessler facility, and began moving through it chronologically, not looking for anything specific. Just letting her eyes rest on each image and waiting to see what her brain had noticed that it hadn't told her yet. She found it on the 7th image, the vehicle patterns. Iron Covenant vehicles accessed the facility from the Eastern Approach Road in a consistent pattern that matched every piece of behavior she had documented about Webb's network. They were careful, they were disciplined, they staggered their timing to avoid creating recognizable signatures. But 3 days ago, one vehicle had taken a different route. And that vehicle, a dark green pickup truck that appeared in 3 separate images over a 4-hour window, had approached from the west, from the direction of Fort Liberty. Emily stared at the image. She pulled up the intercept logs from the same 72-hour window and began cross-referencing. She was still working when Major Reynolds walked back into the now empty briefing room to retrieve the remote he had left on the podium. He stopped when he saw her still at the table. You should be prepping your kit, Carter. I know, she said without looking up. Major, can I ask you something? A brief pause. What? The Eastern Approach Road is our primary insertion road. Correct. How many people outside this team know that? Reynolds walked toward her, the kind of deliberate walk that meant she had his attention, whether she wanted it or not. What are you looking at? She turned the laptop screen so he could see the satellite image. She walked him through what she'd found: the vehicle, the unusual route, the timing relative to when the insertion plan had been finalized. Reynolds studied the image for a long moment. That could be anything, he said finally. A different driver, a road condition, a coincidence. It could be, Emily agreed. You're suggesting we have a leak. I'm suggesting the possibility exists and is worth examining before we insert. Reynolds straightened. She watched him run through the calculations she had already run herself: the cost of delaying to investigate versus the cost of inserting into a compromised operation. The weather window, the web timeline, the intelligence that had taken 6 weeks to develop. We are not delaying this mission based on one anomalous vehicle in a satellite image, he said. I'm not asking you to delay it, Major. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that they know we're coming. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite frustration, something more complicated than that. Carter, he said, and his voice was more measured now, more careful. I understand what you're paid to do. Your job is to find threats in data. That's a valuable skill, but it can also lead you to see threats in things that aren't threats. We cannot run an operation paralyzed by every possible hypothetical the intelligence picture could theoretically support. I know, she said. Then we're in agreement. I just want it noted that I raised it. Noted. He picked up the remote from the podium. Prep your kit, Carter. Wheels up in 4 hours. He walked out. Emily looked at the satellite image on her screen for another long moment. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and went to prep her kit. Her kit included things that were not on the official packing list for a DIA analyst attached to a special operations command element. But Emily Carter had learned a very long time ago to carry what you needed, not what the form said you needed. The 4 hours before insertion were the kind of 4 hours that stretched and compressed at the same time, simultaneously longer than they should have been, and gone before she fully registered they had passed. Emily ran through her pre-mission checks with the same thoroughness she applied to everything, the kind of thoroughness that had gotten her labeled as obsessive by people who confuse precision with paranoia. She reviewed the full intercept package one more time. She updated her threat assessment. She tried once more to identify the Western Approach vehicle in the imagery database. She couldn't. That, in her experience, was never a good sign. Things that couldn't be explained didn't usually turn out to have benign explanations. They turned out to have explanations you had failed to imagine. She went to find Sergeant Hayes. Staff Sergeant Michael Hayes was Task Force Sentinel's primary sniper. Emily had reviewed his file too. 8 years as a Special Forces sniper. Multiple confirmed long-range engagements across 2 theaters. The kind of professional who approached his work with the same quiet seriousness that Emily approached hers, someone who understood that the distance between competence and excellence in his line of work was the difference between a successful mission and a tragedy. She found him alone in the equipment room, running a final check on his rifle, the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, a weapon Emily knew with a familiarity that would have surprised Hayes considerably if he had known about it. Sergeant Hayes, he looked up. Ma'am, do you mind if I ask you something? Go ahead. The insertion route takes us along the eastern ridge. Once we're inside the tree line, what's your planned overwatch position? Hayes set the rifle down and looked at her with the careful, neutral expression of a man who was trying to figure out whether this question was coming from professional curiosity or from something else. Building 3 gives me the best sight line across the main compound and the approach road, he said. And if Building 3 is already occupied, a pause. Then I adapt to secondary position. South end of Building 1 has an acceptable line of sight, though the angle on the western approach is compromised. Emily nodded slowly. Why, Hayes said. She hesitated for just a moment. I ran some analysis on the compound layout this afternoon. I think there may be a firing position on the upper floor of Building 4 that your pre-mission assessment might not have flagged. Hayes looked at her. Building 4 is a storage facility, no windows on the upper level facing the compound. There are load doors on the upper eastern face. They're not shown clearly on the 2019 survey map I cross-referenced with an older image from 2014, and they predate the renovation. If they were still accessible, they'd give someone a clean firing line over the eastern ridge. Silence. Hayes studied her for a moment longer. "You're not just here to read satellite images, are you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "My job is to support this mission," Emily said. "That means flagging anything that could affect outcomes." Hayes didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he said, "I'll factor in Building 4. "Thank you, Sergeant." She walked away. Behind her, she heard Hayes pick up his rifle again. At 2100 hours, Task Force Sentinel loaded into the transport vehicles. The team's energy in the vehicles was the particular kind of focused quiet that Emily had observed before in people preparing for something serious. Not fear was there, she was sure, in some form in most of them, because only people with no imagination experience no fear before this kind of work, but something adjacent to fear that had been processed and compressed and set aside to be dealt with in whatever form it emerged once the shooting started. She sat between Okafor and Tran. Tran was younger up close than he looked in his file photograph. He had the kind of face that age had not yet fully settled into, and he was holding his rifle with a grip that was just slightly too tight, the knuckles not quite white, but working toward it. Emily had been exactly that kind of tense once. She remembered what it felt like. "Your first mountain insertion," she said quietly. Tran looked at her, slightly surprised to be addressed. "No, ma'am, third." "How were the first two?" He considered this seriously, which she appreciated. "First one went smooth. Second one, we had a vehicle failure on extract and spent 4 extra hours waiting in the cold for the backup." 4 hours in the cold is character building," Okafor said from her other side without opening his eyes. He had the appearance of a man who had decided to rest and was executing that decision with the same professionalism he applied to everything else. "That's what they tell me, Sergeant," Tran said. "It's true, cold is clarifying. You find out very quickly what matters and what doesn't." Emily looked at Okafor. "Have you inserted with an analyst before?" He opened his eyes. They were very calm. 3 times. "How did it go?" "Different each time." He paused. "One time, the analyst saved us 4 hours of searching by knowing exactly where to look for a document's cache. One time, the analyst panicked when the shooting started and had to be physically moved from the breach point by Kowalski." Another pause. "And one time, the analyst turned out to be considerably more prepared for the situation than anyone expected." He said the last part evenly, without inflection, his eyes resting on Emily in a way that felt like something more than casual observation. "3 different analysts," she said. "Of course," Okafor said, and he closed his eyes again. Emily turned and looked out the window at the darkness passing. She thought about the vehicle on the western approach road. She thought about the load doors in Building 4 that Hayes might or might not have added to his threat assessment. She thought about Marcus Webb and his ordinary-looking face and the weapons data he had moved through channels that she still hadn't fully mapped. And she thought about the rifle in her own bag, the one that wasn't on the official packing list, in the decision she had made so quietly that she had almost made it without noticing. Some decisions you make loud with intention and deliberation. Some decisions you have already made long before you recognize that they were decisions at all. The mountains rose dark ahead of them as the vehicles climbed. The snow had started. They went on foot the last 2 miles. The cold was the kind that didn't announce itself dramatically. It simply settled into you layer by layer until you became aware that you had been cold for longer than you realized. Emily pulled her fleece closer and kept pace with the command element. Reynolds ahead of her, Okafor just behind 2 additional operators forming the security element around them. The team moved with a fluency that Emily found genuinely impressive, even after all the time she had spent studying people who did this. They were like a single organism navigating the dark. Not perfectly silent, because perfect silence is a myth, but close enough that the sounds they made were swallowed by the wind and the snow before they could carry. Hayes had moved ahead with the advance element. Emily tracked his position on the team's shared display. Kowalski's element was taking the southern approach. Tran was with the breach team. Everything so far was moving according to plan. Too according to plan, a part of Emily's mind said. She pushed the thought back. She pulled up the intercept feed on her tablet, and then she saw something. A communication burst encrypted, short, the kind of compressed signal that wouldn't even register on most monitoring systems had gone out from inside the Kessler facility approximately 40 minutes ago. Not to a standard network, to a frequency that Emily recognized. Her hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She grabbed Reynolds' arm. He stopped and turned, and the look on his face said he was already irritated before she spoke. "We have a problem," she said. "Carter, we are 400 meters from the objective. 40 minutes ago, someone inside that facility sent a burst transmission on a frequency that I recognize from the Iron Covenant intercept package," she said, keeping her voice very low and very even. "That frequency was used 6 weeks ago to coordinate an ambush on a DEA surveillance team in Arizona. The DEA team knew what was coming, which means someone told them. That someone used this frequency." Reynolds stared at her. "I think they know we're coming," she said. "I think they've known for at least 40 minutes. The silence between them lasted only seconds but felt considerably longer. Reynolds keyed his radio. "All elements halt. Command is conducting an assessment. Hold positions." The team froze. He looked at Emily. "Show me." She showed him the burst transmission, the frequency match, the Arizona connection. He leaned over her tablet in the dark and studied it the way he studied everything, systematically, efficiently, without letting whatever he was feeling show on his face. "This could be a coincidence," he said. "It could be." He stood up. She watched him make the decision. She could see it happen not on his face, which remained controlled, but in the set of his shoulders and the slight shift of his weight. "We're proceeding," he said. "Major. We are proceeding, Carter. If we abort this mission on an unconfirmed intercept web walks, the data walks, everything we've built toward for 6 weeks is gone." His voice was low and absolutely certain. "What I will do is put the team on heightened alert and have Hayes establish overwatch before we breach. If there's a threat inside those walls, we will identify it before we walk into it. And if we can't identify it before we walk into it," he looked at her steadily. "That's what training is for." He keyed his radio again and began issuing adjusted instructions to the team. Emily looked at the facility ahead, the dark shapes of buildings against darker mountains, the snow falling between. She reached into her bag and shifted the contents. Her hand found what she needed without her eyes having to leave the facility. She had made her decision. She just hadn't needed to use it yet. The breach happened at 0207 hours. 2 teams, 2 entry points, simultaneous. Reynolds had moved the command element to a position behind the main vehicle barrier. 40 meters east of Building 1, good cover, clear sight lines to the 2 primary entry points close enough to the action to be relevant, far enough to maintain command perspective. Emily was positioned behind the barrier beside Okafor. Her tablet was in her hand. The rifle in her bag was within reach. For 60 seconds, nothing happened. Then Tran's voice came over the radio. "Breach team inside, moving to first objective, no contact." Then Kowalski's south element inside, Building 2 clear. And then a pause. A pause of exactly the wrong length. The kind of pause that every person who has ever been in a situation like this knows immediately in their body before their mind has had time to process it. And then the night exploded. The upper floor of Building 1 lit up with weapons fire, not 1 gun, not 2, but a coordinated volume of fire that told Emily in a single cold second that the people inside had not only known they were coming, but had specifically positioned themselves to catch the breach teams in a crossfire. "Contact." Tran's voice urgent but controlled. "Multiple shooters, upper floor, Building 1. We are pinned down, we cannot advance. South element, we have fire from Building 3, Kowalski. 2 personnel, down, repeat. 2 personnel, down. Reynolds was already moving, already issuing orders, already running the calculus of a situation that had gone from controlled to catastrophic in under a minute. And then the machine gun opened up. It came from somewhere on the 2nd level of Building 2, a position that nobody had anticipated because the pre-mission intelligence had showed Building 2 as a storage facility with no firing positions on the 2nd level. The load doors, the ones Emily had mentioned to Hayes, the ones she had not been certain Hayes had factored in. The machine gun swept the open ground between the barrier and Building 1 and locked the entire team in place. Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Where is Hayes? I need overwatch on that gun. Hayes, do you have a position?" Static. Then Hayes's voice, and it was wrong, too tight, too high, the kind of voice that means something bad has happened to the person using it. "Command, I'm hit. I am down. I cannot." The voice cut out. The team's sniper was down. The machine gun was systematically destroying their ability to move. Two team members were already wounded somewhere in Building 2's approach. And the people who had set this trap were doing what well-prepared ambushers do. They were not rushing, they were not panicking, they were holding position and letting the situation work for them, letting the trapped men exhaust their options one by one. Reynolds turned to Okafor. The look that passed between them was the look of two experienced men who have just recognized the shape of a very bad situation. "We need that gun suppressed," Reynolds said. "Options." "Without Hayes, we don't have a long-range solution," Okafor said. "We could try to flank it through the maintenance tunnel to the northwest, but that takes us past Building 3, and Kowalski already has contact from Building 3. What about the roof of the barrier structure? Exposed approach. They'll see us before we get close enough to do anything useful." Another burst from the machine gun. Concrete debris scattered across the barrier. Reynolds turned to Emily almost as an afterthought. "Can you tell me anything useful, Carter?" Emily had already put away her tablet. She was looking at the upper face of Building 2, specifically at the load doors on the upper eastern face, which were open now. The barrel of the machine gun, just visible as a dark shape against the lighter darkness behind it. "Yes," she said. "What?" She reached into her bag. "I can tell you the exact angle." And she pulled out the M2010. Reynolds stared at it. Then he stared at her. For a moment, that was only a moment, but felt like considerably more than that. The only sound was the ongoing fire, the wind and the snow. "Carter," Reynolds said, "what is that?" "A rifle, Major." She was already looking at the position, already running the numbers she had been running since she first identified the load door position. "I suggest you let me use it." "You are not—" He stopped, looked at her, really looked at her, possibly for the first time. "You are not trained for—" "With respect, Major," Emily said, her voice very calm and very quiet. "That machine gun is going to kill your people in approximately the next 4 minutes. You can spend those 4 minutes questioning whether I know what I'm doing, or you can spend them moving your secondary elements to take advantage of the situation when I address the gun." Another burst from the machine gun. A short, horrible silence from the direction of transposition. "Tran, Reynolds said into the radio. "Report." "Nothing. Tran, here." The voice was ragged. "Martinez is hit. Leg wound. We are still in position, but we cannot move." Reynolds looked at Emily. Something crossed his face, not quite belief, not quite trust, but the particular expression of a commander who has run out of options and is confronted with the only one remaining, however impossible it seems. "Do not miss," he said. Emily Carter settled into position. And the person who had walked into that briefing room that morning as an intelligence analyst, someone who understood maps, someone who read reports, someone who had never experienced the chaos of a real firefight, disappeared. What was left was something else entirely, something quieter, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. She looked through the scope and the world narrowed to numbers and angles and the specific weight of cold air at this altitude on this night with this wind. The machine gun position filled the scope. Distance 430 meters. Wind consistent from the northwest, approximately 12 knots. Elevation differential, she was below and to the east. The barrel of the machine gun was visible through the load door opening. She needed it to be visible. She exhaled. The world went quiet. She was 23 years old again and standing in a blizzard on an evaluation range in Montana while an instructor behind her said quietly, "Whenever you're ready, Carter." She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the mountain like something breaking. The machine gun went silent, instantly, completely, definitively silent. Reynolds was staring at her. Okafor was staring at her. Neither of them spoke. "Move your elements," Emily said, already working the bolt, already scanning for the next threat. "You have maybe 90 seconds before they understand what happened and reposition." Reynolds blinked, and then he was on the radio, and his voice had the particular quality of a commander who has just recalibrated everything, because everything had just changed. She found the second target 30 seconds later. Hayes had told her about the Building 3 firing position during their conversation in the equipment room. He had mentioned it in the context of his own Overwatch planning. Emily had filed it away without knowing why, the way you file things away when you're not yet sure what puzzle they belong to. Now she knew. A figure was moving inside Building 3's upper level, moving with purpose, moving toward a specific position, moving with the particular deliberateness of a trained shooter who has just realized the machine gun is gone and is trying to compensate. Enemy sniper. Emily acquired the target. The calculation took less than 3 seconds. She fired. The figure in Building 3's window stopped moving. Reynolds on the radio was pushing his elements forward through the opportunity Emily had just created. Kowalski's south element, released from the fire that had been suppressing them, beginning to advance. Trans breach team still pinned, but now with one source of fire eliminated, beginning to find options. But the enemy inside the facility was not done. Because whoever had planned this ambush, whoever had set this trap with such deliberate, patient precision had planned for contingencies. Emily saw the movement on the rooftop of Building 1. 2 figures, moving quickly, moving low, carrying something between them. Something with a distinctive profile. Anti-armor weapons, shoulder-fired rockets, aimed at the position where the command element was sheltering. Okafor, Emily said. He was already looking. I see them. Tell the Major to move his element 10 meters left. Now. Okafor grabbed Reynolds. Move, wait. Now if Reynolds moved, Emily did not. She stayed exactly where she was because moving would change every calculation she had already made, and she did not have time to remake them. She acquired the first figure, fired, shifted, acquired the second, fired. The rooftop was clear. Reynolds crouched 10 meters to her left, turned, and looked at her across the gap. She was already scanning again. She didn't look back at him because she had found the communications team. 3 people ground level eastern side of Building 2 behind cover. That was excellent for protection from the direction of the main assault, but had not been optimized for protection from a position 40 meters to the east. One of them had a radio. He was talking. In Emily's experience, a radio call from a defensive position during an active firefight meant one of 2 things. Either he was coordinating with the fighters inside the facility, or he was calling for reinforcement from somewhere outside it. Given everything else she had observed about how thoroughly this ambush had been prepared, she did not think it was the first option. She fired 3 times in 4 seconds. The communications team stopped transmitting. Then she lowered the rifle slightly and took a single measured breath. In 12 minutes on a mountain in Colorado, in a snowstorm, in the dark, 8 targets, 8 shots, 8 outcomes that meant the people she had inserted with that night would be going home. Reynolds' voice came over the radio. All elements threat assessment. Kowalski south element advancing. 2 wounded non-critical. Building 2 is ours. Trans breach team moving. Martinez is stable. Building 1, we have 3 personnel surrendering. Repeat, enemy personnel are surrendering. And then very quietly from a position well to the north. Command, this is Hayes. Reynolds straightened. Hayes, report. I'm mobile. Glancing wound I can operate. But command, I need you to tell me something. Go ahead. The machine gun that was on the Building 2 upper level, it's not firing anymore. Did someone take it out? Reynolds looked across to where Emily was already lowering the M2010, already beginning the methodical process of checking the surrounding terrain one final time before standing. Affirmative, Reynolds said slowly. Who? A pause. And then Reynolds said something that cost him something. Emily could hear it even through the radio, even at this distance, even in the middle of a firefight. He said Carter. A longer pause from Hayes. Then quietly, ma'am, I thought I was the only one in the room who noticed those low doors. Emily allowed herself a small private exhale. You noticed them, Sergeant, she said. You just got hurt before you could use that information. Yeah, Hayes said. I guess I did. Reynolds walked toward Emily across the snow-covered ground between them. He stopped 2 meters away. He looked at her, at the rifle, at her face. Emily, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. She met his eyes. We still have a mission to complete, Major, she said. Webb is still somewhere in this facility, and we have a leak to find. Reynolds opened his mouth, closed it, looked at her for one more moment with the expression of a man who has discovered very late that he has been completely and fundamentally wrong about something important. Then he straightened. All elements, he said into the radio. Advance on Building 1. Secure all personnel. Find me Marcus Webb. He looked at Emily once more. Stay close, he said. And this time it was not an instruction about where to stand or what role to play. It was something else, something closer to recognition. Emily Carter picked up her bag, settled the rifle strap on her shoulder, and followed Task Force Sentinel into the facility. The mountain was quiet now except for the wind and the snow. But she wasn't finished yet. She was just getting started. 0219 hours. The facility smelled like concrete dust and cold air, and something else that Emily recognized but didn't name. She had been in enough places where violence had recently occurred to know that the smell was not something you forgot. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the way movies described it. It was just a particular quality of the air that told you something irreversible had happened here, and the air itself hadn't finished deciding what to do with that information. Reynolds moved ahead of her, his radio in one hand, his sidearm in the other, issuing quiet instructions to the elements, clearing the building room by room. Emily stayed close, not because he had told her to, but because the command element was where she could be most useful right now, and useful was the only thing she had ever genuinely cared about being. Okafor fell in beside her without being asked. I didn't say anything. He didn't look at her with the expression most people wore after watching someone do something that recategorized them entirely. He simply adjusted his position so that she was flanked on her left weapon, up moving with the team, the way he had always moved, as if everything happening was exactly what he had expected to happen. She appreciated that about him more than she could have articulated. Tran's voice came through the radio first. Building 1 second floor secure. We have 4 personnel in custody, 3 fighters, and 1 individual matching the Webb photograph. Repeat possible Webb in custody. Reynolds stopped walking. Emily stopped walking. Possible, Reynolds said into the radio. What do you mean possible? He's the right age, right build, right general appearance. But he's not talking, and he doesn't have any ID in him, and a pause, a short, uncomfortable pause. And something about it feels off, Major. Reynolds looked at Emily. She was already pulling up the facial recognition software on her tablet, cross-referencing against the personnel file photograph of Marcus Webb. Get me a visual, she said. Trent understood. 30 seconds later, a low-resolution image came through on the shared network. A man mid-50s, seated against a wall, wrists secured face forward, expressionless. Emily studied it for 4 seconds. That's not Webb, she said. Reynolds looked at her tablet, then back at her. You're certain. The jaw structure is wrong. Webb has a slight asymmetry in his left mandible from a documented injury in 2003. This man's jaw is symmetric. She held the image beside the file photograph. Different man, similar build, similar coloring. They dressed him up. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a realization landing. A decoy, Reynolds said. They put someone who looks like Webb in a visible position, Emily said. Someone they were willing to sacrifice, which means Webb knew we were coming long enough to plan an alternate exit. Reynolds was already moving again faster now. Kowalski, South Element. Do you have eyes on any personnel exfiltrating the facility? Kowalski's response was immediate. Negative. South perimeter is secure. Nobody has come through here. North Element, negative. Reynolds stopped in the middle of the corridor and did something Emily had not yet seen him do. He was still for a full 3 seconds, not issuing orders, not moving, just thinking, running the geometry of the situation as fast as his mind could process it. Emily ran it faster. The maintenance tunnel, she said. He looked at her. Okafor mentioned it earlier as a possible flanking route. You didn't use it because Kowalski had contact from Building 3. But Building 3 is now secure. She pulled up the facility schematic. The maintenance tunnel runs under the facility from Building 2 to a utility access point approximately 300 meters north of the perimeter. If Webb left before we breached, if he had 40 minutes of warning from that burst transmission, he's already through the tunnel, Reynolds said. Or he's still in it. Reynolds was on the radio in under a second. All elements, I need 2 personnel at the Building 2 maintenance tunnel access now. If there is a tunnel exit north of the perimeter, I need someone on it immediately. Move. He looked at Emily. How fast can you find that exit on the imagery? She was already looking. Give me 90 seconds. She gave him 65. The exit was a concrete utility hatch approximately 320 meters due north of the building. 2 foundation partially concealed by a stand of pine trees that didn't show up clearly on the 2019 survey map because they had grown in since the last aerial survey update. She showed Reynolds. He turned and ran. She ran with him. Okafor ran with both of them. Behind them, she could hear the building being methodically cleared. Trans team working room to room, Kowalski's element, securing the southern approach. Hayes somewhere in the north trying to get his wounded shoulder back under enough control to be useful. The cold hit them again when they exited Building 2 through the north door, the particular cold of Aero 230 hours in the Rockies in February, the kind that makes every breath feel like a minor act of determination. They ran north. Emily's boots found purchase in the snow, and she matched Reynolds' pace, which was not a casual pace. The man was fast for someone his size, and she had the distinct impression he had not expected her to keep up. She kept up. 320 meters in fresh snow in the dark takes approximately 4 minutes at a controlled run. They covered it in 3.5. The utility hatch was exactly where Emily's calculation had placed it. It was open. Reynolds dropped to one knee beside it, weapon up, listening. From below from the tunnel, there was the distant sound of movement. Not close. Retreating. "He's still in it," Reynolds said. It was barely a breath. He looked at Emily with an expression that was half calculation and half something she had not seen on his face before, a kind of electric, urgent focus that transformed him from the control commander who had dismissed her in the briefing room into something rawer and more immediate. "Can you estimate his head start?" Emily thought about the burst transmission, timing the transit distance. The pace at which a man in his mid-50s, who was not a trained combat athlete, would move through an underground tunnel carrying whatever he needed to carry. 15 to 20 minutes, she said. If he's been moving consistently, he's near the far end. If he slowed down when the shooting started, when he thought his ambush was working, he might still be in the middle section. Reynolds made the decision in under 2 seconds. "I'm going in," he said. "Major, he cannot leave this facility with that data." Reynolds was already at the hatch. "Okafor, you're with me. Carter, stay on the surface. Keep tracking his exit point, and if he surfaces anywhere unexpected, tell me." She opened her mouth, closed it, because he was already dropping into the tunnel and Okafor was right behind him, and she was standing alone in the snow, next to an open hatch at Aero 233 hours in the mountains of Colorado. And the situation had just changed shape again, in the way that only truly unstable situations do, not once, but repeatedly, each new shape more demanding than the last. She pulled up the schematic on her tablet. She started calculating, because Marcus Webb was not her only problem. And she had a feeling he already knew that. The tunnel exit, according to the schematic, led to a utility access road that connected to the main mountain road, approximately 600 meters further north. If Webb had a vehicle positioned at the tunnel exit, and a man who had planned an ambush this thoroughly would absolutely have a vehicle positioned at the tunnel exit, he had a maximum 4-minute window between surfacing and being on a road that led to 3 different highway connections. Emily pulled up the Intercept network on her tablet and started running a search for any active communication in the surrounding area. She found one almost immediately, a short encrypted signal, different frequency from the burst transmission she had identified earlier, but using the same underlying encoding structure, coming from approximately 400 meters north-northwest of her current position. Someone was communicating from outside the facility, from a position between her and the tunnel exit. Emily stood very still in the snow for a moment. She thought about the vehicle on the Western Approach Road, the one that had come from the direction of Fort Liberty, the one she hadn't been able to identify. She thought about the decoy, the man dressed to look like Webb, positioned to be found to give the team the satisfaction of a capture and slow their search for the real target. She thought about the intercept frequency and the Arizona ambush and the DEA surveillance team that had known what was coming. And she arrived quietly and with great clarity at a conclusion she had been circling for hours. This operation had not simply been compromised by a leak. It had been actively managed by someone with enough access to shape the team's intelligence picture before they ever set foot on this mountain. Someone who knew not just the insertion route and the timing, but the team's contingency plans and their intelligence gaps, and she turned this over carefully, their personnel roster. Their full personnel roster, including the DIA analyst attached to the command element, including Emily Carter, which meant whoever was communicating from 400 meters north-northwest was not just running Webb's escape. They were watching for her. She didn't let herself process the full weight of that thought. Not yet. She filed it the way she filed everything in the middle of a situation into a partition in her mind, labeled "deal with this," later a partition that had gotten considerably fuller over the course of this night. She keyed her radio. "Major Reynolds." Static. The tunnel was apparently thick enough to interfere with the signal. She tried again. Nothing. She looked north-northwest. 400 meters. She looked at the rifle in her hands. Then she looked back at the open hatch. She made a decision that she recognized, even as she made it, would generate considerable conversation afterward. She went north. The snow was working with her now, muffling her footsteps, softening the sounds of the mountain, creating a kind of acoustic privacy that she used the way she used everything, deliberately and without waste. She moved in a line that kept the tree cover between her and the signal source for as long as possible, cutting the approach angle so that she would arrive from the west rather than the south, which was the direction anyone watching for pursuit from the facility would naturally monitor. 200 meters. She stopped because the signal was moving. Not fast, not a vehicle, not a run, but a walking pace, moving in the direction of the tunnel exit. Moving to intercept Webb when he surfaced. She changed her angle, 150 meters. She stopped again and used the rifle scope to look ahead through the trees. She found the figure. Male, medium build, moving with the practiced, unhurried confidence of someone who believed they had operational control of the situation. He was wearing civilian cold weather gear, good gear, expensive gear, the kind that serious outdoor professionals used rather than the tactical equipment that Iron Covenant fighters had been wearing inside the facility. He had a radio in one hand, and as she watched, he raised it and spoke. She was too far away to hear what he said, but she was close enough to see his face when he lowered the radio and turned slightly to check his six. Emily had a very good memory for faces. She had been trained to develop it, and she had been thorough in that training, the way she was thorough in everything. She recognized this face. She recognized it from a photograph in a personnel file she had reviewed 4 months ago during the initial intelligence work on Iron Covenant, during the early stages when she had been mapping the supply network, when she had been trying to understand how weapons data moved from secured military systems to an extremist network operating in the mountains. The photograph had been in a sub-file attached to a logistics contracting review. The face belonged to a man named Gerald Hutchins. Gerald Hutchins, who was listed in that file as a senior contracting liaison for military supply chain operations at Fort Liberty. Gerald Hutchins, who had full access to Task Force operational scheduling. Gerald Hutchins, who had a dark green pickup truck. The cold that moved through Emily in that moment had nothing to do with the temperature. She held the scope on him and breathed and let the full picture assemble itself in the way that full pictures assembled when you had been working toward them long enough, not in a rush of revelation, but in the quiet, almost anticlimactic way that things become clear when all the pieces finally align. He was the leak. He had been the leak from the beginning. He had told Webb about the mission. He had known the insertion route, the timing, the team roster, the intelligence picture. He had shaped what the team saw and what they didn't see. He had arranged for the ambush that had put Hayes down and wounded Martinez and pinned Tran's team in a building with no good exit. He had tried to get Task Force Sentinel killed on this mountain. And right now, he was 40 meters from the tunnel exit, waiting to escort Marcus Webb to a waiting vehicle and disappear. Emily lowered the rifle slightly because she didn't want to shoot Gerald Hutchins. She wanted to capture Gerald Hutchins. A dead man could not answer questions. A dead man could not identify other members of the network, could not reveal who else had access, could not explain how deep the compromise went. A dead man was the end of a thread. A living man in custody was the thread itself. She keyed her radio again. Any element, this is Carter. I have eyes on a possible secondary threat north of the facility, approximately 350 meters from the tunnel exit. This individual may be connected to the intelligence compromise. I am requesting any available personnel to converge on my position. I am sending coordinates now, static. Then surprisingly, Carter. This is Hayes. His voice was strained, but it was there. I read you. I'm on the north perimeter. Send the coordinates. She sent them. 2 minutes, Hayes said. She confirmed and went back to watching Hutchins through the scope. He was closer to the tunnel exit now. She did the math. 2 minutes for Hayes. Unknown time for Reynolds to clear the tunnel and surface. Hutchins at his current pace would be at the exit in approximately 90 seconds. The math did not resolve favorably. She moved. Not running in snow makes noise, and she needed the 30 seconds of silence that a fast walk could give her. She closed the distance, kept the trees between them, and when she was close enough that her voice could carry without her having to shout, she stopped. She raised the rifle, and she spoke. Gerald Hutchins. He spun. The radio clattered into the snow. I was staring at her, at the rifle pointed at him, at her face, at the fact that someone had just said his name in the dark on a mountain where he had believed himself to be invisible. For a full second, he was absolutely still. Then something shifted in his expression. Not fear, something colder than fear, something calculated. "You're the analyst," he said. "That's right. You're supposed to be with the command element." I redirected. He looked at the rifle in her hands. "You're a DIA analyst." "Among other things," Emily said. He was still calculating. She could see it happening. He was running his options, looking for the one that worked the way a man who had been running contingencies all night would look for the contingency that applied to this particular moment. She didn't give him enough time to find it. "Put your hands where I can see them," she said. "Do it slowly. Do not reach for anything. There are additional personnel converging on this position right now, and I need you to still be alive when they arrive." "If I'm alive when they arrive," he said, "I'm going to prison for the rest of my life." "Yes," Emily said, "you are. So you understand why I'm not particularly motivated to cooperate." "I understand perfectly," she said. "And I'm telling you anyway. Hands up. Step away from the tunnel exit. Do it now." He took one slow step to his left, and then he did something she had been watching, for his right hand moved toward his jacket, not fast, not dramatically, but with the particular purposefulness of someone who has decided that a bad option is better than no option. She fired once. The shot hit the snow approximately 18 inches to his right. He froze. "The next one," Emily said, "will not be a warning shot. I don't like warning shots. I find them wasteful. I'm making an exception right now because I need you breathing. I will not make another exception." Hutchins' right hand came up slowly. Both hands came up. He stood in the snow with his hands raised and looked at her across the gap between them. This man who had built a betrayal that reached through Fort Liberty and into Task Force Sentinel, and had tried to ensure that everyone on that mountain died tonight. And his expression was something that Emily found more interesting than anger or fear. It was curiosity. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Burst transmission," she said. "Different frequency from the one you used earlier, but the same encoding structure. Sloppy." Something moved across his face. Frustration, maybe. The frustration of a man who had been meticulous about everything and had missed one detail. "The encoding was standard Iron Covenant protocol," he said. "I know," she said. "I wrote the analysis that identified that protocol 6 weeks ago." A pause. "You've been working this case since the beginning," he said slowly. "Since before the beginning," she said. "Since the first intercept that suggested there was an internal leak. I just couldn't identify you until tonight." Another pause, longer. "And you still came on the mission," he said, "knowing there was a leak and not knowing who it was." "I came because the mission needed to succeed," she said, "and because I thought being here might be the only way to find you." His hands were still up. His eyes were still calculating. "You're not what they told me you were," he said. "Nobody is," Emily said. "Hands behind your head, fingers interlocked. Kneel." He knelt. She heard Hayes before she saw him, the sound of someone moving fast through snow from the north, moving with a controlled urgency that suggested a man pushing through pain to get somewhere he needed to be. Hayes emerged from the tree cover with his rifle up his left shoulder, wrapped in a field dressing that was already dark with blood, his face tight and pale and absolutely determined. He stopped when he saw the situation. He took it in Hutchins kneeling in the snow, Emily standing with the M2010, the general geometry of a detainment in progress. He looked at Emily. She lowered her rifle slightly. "Is he intact?" Hayes said. "Physically, yes." Hayes moved to flank Hutchins from the right. "You have flex cuffs. Inner left pocket." Hayes reached into his own vest and produced a zip tie. He moved behind Hutchins and secured his wrists with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it many times. Then he looked at Emily again. "The tunnel," he said. "Webb." At that exact moment, the utility hatch 30 meters away burst open. Marcus Webb came out of the ground at a run. He ran exactly 3 steps before he registered that the 2 people standing in the snow ahead of him were not Gerald Hutchins in a clear escape route. He stopped. He looked at Emily. He looked at Hayes. He looked at Hutchins kneeling in the snow with his wrists secured. And Marcus Webb, the man who had orchestrated a supply network capable of stealing classified military weapons data, who had planned an ambush meticulously enough to account for nearly every possible response from a highly trained special operations team, who had a dark green pickup truck waiting somewhere north of here on a utility access road, did what intelligent men do when they encounter a situation that cannot be won. He put his hands up. "Don't shoot," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. He was looking at Emily with an expression that was, she realized, almost identical to Hutchins' expression, that same curious recalibrating quality, the look of a man who had made a comprehensive assessment of the battlefield and discovered an element he had not accounted for. Emily's voice when she spoke was steady. "Marcus Webb, you are under detention by order of the United States government. Do not move, do not speak, kneel on the ground." He knelt. 3 seconds later, Reynolds came out of the hatch at a run with Okafor right behind him, and both men stopped when they found Webb already on the ground and Emily already standing over him. Reynolds looked at Emily. Emily looked at Reynolds. And Okafor, calm, steady, unflappable. Okafor made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath, but was somewhere in between the sound of a man who had seen something he had not expected and was deciding how to feel about it. "I told you," Okafor said quietly, "to no one in particular." Third time. Reynolds crouched beside Webb and looked at the man they had come to capture, the man who was supposed to be behind the locked doors of a fortified facility, not kneeling in the snow 300 meters north of it. "Where is the data?" Reynolds said. Webb looked at him, then looked at Emily. "You want to ask your analyst," he said. "She seems to know more about this than you do." Reynolds looked at Emily. She had already been thinking about it. The data was not in Webb's hands. He had come out of the tunnel with nothing visible, which meant either he had left it inside or it was somewhere on his person. "Check his jacket lining," she said. "Right side, the thermal layer has enough thickness to conceal a drive." Reynolds reached into Webb's jacket. His hand came out holding a small, flat drive. He stared at it for a moment. Then he looked at Emily. "How?" he said. "The supply chain data showed 3 purchases of high-capacity drives through a procurement channel associated with Iron Covenant's logistics network 6 weeks ago," she said. "Same type every time. Small form factor, high durability. The kind you carry in a jacket lining when you're planning to run." Reynolds turned the drive over in his hand. Webb was watching Emily with an expression that had moved past calculation into something else, something that might have been in a different context respect. 6 weeks, Webb said. "You've been working this for 6 weeks. "Longer," Emily said. "And you couldn't identify Hutchins?" "No," she said. "Not until tonight." Webb nodded slowly as if confirming something to himself. "He was careful. I chose him because he was careful." "I was careful," she agreed. "He missed 1 encoding signature on 1 transmission in 1 6-hour window. That's all it took." Webb looked at her for another long moment. "What's your name?" he said. Reynolds said, "She's not going to tell you that." "Carter," Emily said. Reynolds turned to look at her. "He'll know it within a week regardless," she said. "Discovery process is thorough." Webb absorbed this. "Carter," he repeated. "I want you to know something, Ms. Carter." "You don't need to tell me anything," she said. "Anything you say can and will." "I know the Miranda Protocol," he said. "I know it well. I'm not confessing to anything. I'm making an observation." He paused. "I planned for every member of this team. I had files on every operator. I knew Reynolds' decision patterns. I knew Okafor's calm under pressure. I knew Hayes' Overwatch methodology. I had contingencies for all of it." "I know," Emily said. "I didn't have a file on you," he said. "Hutchins told me there was a DIA analyst attached to the command element. He said she was a desk analyst. He said she wouldn't be a factor." A pause. That was the only thing he got wrong. The silence that followed was brief. Reynolds broke it. "We're done talking." He stood, moved to Webb, and pulled him upright. "Okafor, take custody. Hayes, you need medical attention right now." "I'm functional major." "You're bleeding through your dressing, Sergeant. Medical, now." He turned to Emily. She expected something, a debrief question, an acknowledgement, some version of the conversation they were going to have, eventually, about everything that had happened on this mountain over the last 90 minutes. What she got instead was Reynolds holding out the data drive. "I need this cataloged and verified before we exfil," he said. "Can you do that?" She took the drive. "Yes," she said. "How long?" "20 minutes. "You have 15. He turned and began issuing exfil instructions into the radio. Emily looked at the drive in her hand. Then she looked at Hayes, who was allowing Okafor to guide him toward the medical element with the reluctant compliance of a man who knew he needed help and didn't like admitting it. She looked at Webb, now in custody, being moved toward the facility. She looked at Hutchins, who was being walked in the same direction by two operators who had come from the north perimeter at Reynolds' summons, and who had not spoken again since she had told him he was going to prison. She looked at this mountain around her, dark and cold and impossibly quiet now after everything, and she felt something settle. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not pride. Something quieter than either of those things. The particular feeling of a person who has done exactly what they were capable of doing at exactly the moment it was required, and who has not done it for recognition or praise or to prove anything to anyone. She did it because the people on that mountain needed it done. That was all. She put the drive in her pocket, picked up her tablet, and walked back toward the facility to find a space with enough light to work. She had 15 minutes. She would use all of them. Inside Building 1, the sounds of the mission's end were replacing the sounds of its crisis-controlled voices, medical activity, the particular organized busyness of a team that had come through the worst of it and was now executing the procedures that would get everyone home. Tran was helping Martinez toward the extract point, one arm over his shoulder, talking quietly and steadily in the way that young men who have discovered they're better than they knew sometimes talk after the first real test of that knowledge. Kowalski was overseeing the custody of the 4 detained fighters, the decoy and 3 others who had surrendered when the tactical situation collapsed, with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this before and found the procedural work after a firefight almost restful compared to the firefight itself. Emily found a corner near the main corridor with a working overhead light. Someone had connected a portable power source to the facility's emergency circuit, and she plugged the drive into her laptop and began the verification process. The data was there, all of it. 6 weeks of classified weapons specifications, acquisition, records, and development documentation for 3 separate programs that Emily had not even known existed until she saw them on the screen in front of her. Her hands moved steadily through the cataloging process, but a part of her mind, the part that was not currently occupied with file verification, was running a parallel analysis. The weapons data was here, but the network that had moved it, the supply chain, the contacts, the intermediary layers between Iron Covenant and its sources, was not entirely contained in this drive. Webb was in custody, Hutchins was in custody, but a network with the reach and sophistication of Iron Covenant did not operate with 2 people. It operated with 20, maybe more, and 11 of those people, the minimum number Emily's mapping had suggested existed beyond what she had definitively identified, were still out there, still connected, still with access to whatever Hutchins had given them before tonight. She verified the last file, encrypted her catalog, and sent it to the secure DIA channel. Then she pulled up her own analysis file, the one she had been building for 6 weeks, and added tonight's data to it. And she started looking for thread number 12. Reynolds found her 12 minutes later. He stood in the doorway of the corridor and watched her work for a moment before he spoke. "Data verified, sent to DIA channel 7 minutes ago," she said without looking up. He was quiet for a moment. "Carter. Major." Another pause, longer than the previous ones. She could hear him deciding how to approach something. "The after-action report," he said finally, "is going to require some explaining." "I imagine so." Specifically, he stopped, started again. "The part where a DIA analyst produces a high-powered sniper rifle from her kit bag and eliminates 8 enemy targets in a 12-minute window while attached to a special operations command element in a non-combat role." 11 minutes, actually, Emily said. The window was 11 minutes and 40 seconds. "Carter." She looked up. Reynolds was standing in the doorway with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the command face, not the dismissal, not the combat focus. Something less defended than all of those. Something that was, she thought, closer to the man underneath the rank. "Who are you?" he said. It was a real question, not rhetorical, not frustrated, genuinely seeking. She considered how much to answer. "I'm a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst," she said. "That part is accurate. And the other part is also accurate," she said, "and classified at a level above your current clearance, which is why it isn't in any file you've seen." Reynolds absorbed this. "You knew," he said slowly, "coming into this mission, you knew about the vehicle on the western approach. You suspected a leak, and you came anyway." "I came because Webb needed to be captured and the data needed to be secured," she said. And because I thought I might be the only person on this team who could identify the source of the leak if I could get close enough to observe it in real time. You used this mission to finish your investigation. I supported this mission, she said. The investigation was concurrent. He looked at her for a moment. Hutchins, he said, you identified him before you detained him. Yes. How long before? Approximately 4 minutes before I had a physical visual on him. Reynolds ran a hand over his face. It was the first genuinely unguarded gesture she had seen from him all night. And you went after him alone, on a mountain, in the dark. You were in the tunnel, she said. The radio wasn't penetrating. I had a time-critical target. You could have waited. Webb would have surfaced, met Hutchins, and been in a vehicle heading north before you cleared the tunnel exit, she said. The math didn't support waiting. Carter, he stopped again. She could see him wanting to say something and working out whether to say it. She saved him the trouble. I know, she said. There are protocols, there are procedures, there are 12 different regulations that cover what I should have done differently tonight. She looked at him steadily. And Webb is in custody, Hutchins is in custody, your team is alive. The data is secured. She paused. I'd make the same decisions again. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I know you would. He stepped into the corridor and walked to the wall across from her, leaned against it, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Martinez is going to be fine, he said. Clean through and through, missed the femoral. He's going to be loudly miserable about physical therapy for the next 6 weeks. A pause. Hayes is getting his shoulder looked at. He's claiming it's minor. Okafor says he's being an idiot. He probably is, Emily said. Kowalski is in a better mood than he should be given, that he took a piece of shrapnel to the forearm that he did not mention until the medic noticed the blood. A pause. Tran is... He stopped. When he continued, his voice was slightly different. Tran is 26 years old, and he held his position under direct fire while his teammate was bleeding, and he didn't break. He didn't break at all. Emily thought about Tron in the transport vehicle, the tight grip on the rifle, the too young face, the seriousness with which he had answered her question about his previous insertions. He won't forget tonight, she said. None of them will, Reynolds said. He pushed off the wall and looked at her. The decoy, he said. Webb planned that specifically for us. He planned it for you, she said, for the team, knowing how a capture-focused mission responds to a visible high-value target. The instinct to secure it, to verify it, to spend time and attention on it, while the actual target moves. She paused. He understood how trained teams think. He was right, Reynolds said. It wasn't self-recrimination, just honesty. If you hadn't flagged the facial asymmetry in under 5 seconds, we'd have spent 10 minutes on that man thinking we had Webb. 10 minutes was all he needed, she said. I know. He looked at her. I underestimated you, he said. She held his gaze. I know. I want you to know that I know it, he said. Not as a formality, not because the after-action report is going to force the issue. I want you to know that I know I was wrong. Emily looked at this man, this careful, competent, genuinely excellent commander who had dismissed her in a briefing room 12 hours ago and had spent the rest of those hours discovering piece by piece what that dismissal had missed. And she felt something that was not quite forgiveness, because there was nothing to forgive, and not quite vindication, because she had not come here to be vindicated. She felt something simpler. She felt seen. Thank you, Major, she said. Reynolds nodded once. Wheels up in 6 minutes, he said. Can you be ready? She was already closing her laptop. I've been ready, she said. And somewhere beneath the mountain in the cold and the dark, work that had started 6 weeks ago and had culminated in 11 minutes and 40 seconds of precision on a sniper's rifle was not finished. It was only turning a corner. Emily Carter picked up her bag. She followed Reynolds out of Building 1 into the cold mountain air toward the extract point where the rest of Task Force Sentinel was assembling. She did not look back at the facility. She was already thinking about thread number 12. The transport vehicles moved down the mountain in silence. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say. The silence of people who had too much, the kind that accumulates after a night like this one and sits in the chest like a stone, heavy and real and not yet ready to be spoken. Martinez was stretched across the rear bench with his legs stabilized and his eyes closed, but he wasn't sleeping. Emily could tell by the precise, controlled rhythm of his breathing, the deliberate breath of a man managing pain by controlling the only thing in his body he still had full authority over. Tran sat beside him with one hand resting on the older man's arm in a gesture so unself-conscious that it was clearly not something he had thought about doing. He had just done it, the way you do things for people you've been through something with before your brain has a chance to weigh in. Hayes was in the second vehicle with Okafor, who had appointed himself Hayes's medical conscience for the duration of the extract, and was by all radio accounts losing the argument about whether Hayes needed to keep his arm elevated. "It's elevated," Hayes said over the radio. "Your definition of elevated and the medical definition of elevated are not the same definition," Okafor replied. "It's above my waist. Your heart is above your waist. That doesn't count." "Sergeant, arm up, Hayes. I will hold it up myself if I have to. I have done it before with larger men than you, and I will do it again." Reynolds in the front passenger seat made a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. He caught himself doing it and went back to looking at the road. Emily sat behind him and looked at the darkness moving past and thought about thread number 12. She had spent the last 20 minutes of the extract prep running background on every name in her Iron Covenant network map. The 11 individuals her 6 weeks of analysis had identified as probable members of the supply chain network beyond Webb and Hutchins. 11 people. 11 threads she hadn't yet fully traced. 11 potential sources of ongoing compromise. 11 was not a comfortable number. What was less comfortable was the emerging shape of the network she was seeing. Because the more she looked at the data recovered from Webb's drive, the more she understood that Iron Covenant was not the organization she had believed it was. It was not a domestic extremist group with military connections. It was a procurement network with an extremist front. The distinction mattered enormously. A domestic extremist group steals weapons data because they want the weapons. A procurement network steals weapons data because someone is paying them to. And the people paying them are not by definition the people operating in abandoned mountain facilities in Colorado. The people paying them were somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere with significantly more resources. Emily opened a new analysis file on her tablet and started writing. Reynolds' voice came from the front seat. "You're working." "I am. We're 40 minutes from base." "I know." A pause. "Can it wait 40 minutes? She thought about the shape of what she was starting to see in the data. "Probably not," she said. Reynolds turned in his seat and looked at her. In the low light of the transport vehicle, his face was tired in a way that command faces weren't supposed to be the tiredness of someone who had spent the last 4 hours running on something more than adrenaline and was now feeling what happens when that runs out. "Talk me through it," he said. She looked up from the tablet. "You sure?" "I have 40 minutes and I'm not sleeping," he said. "Talk me through it." She turned the tablet so he could see the screen, and she started at the beginning, not the beginning of the mission, but the beginning of 6 weeks ago, when a single anomalous intercept had flagged a communications pattern that didn't fit any existing profile and had landed on Emily's desk on a Tuesday afternoon in December. She walked him through it the same way she walked through everything methodically, precisely, without editorializing, letting the data speak in its own voice and then interpreting it rather than leading with the interpretation. Reynolds listened the way she had observed him doing everything completely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't reach for his phone. He looked at the data she showed him and he listened to what she said about it, and she understood, genuinely present in a way that a lot of people who held his rank had trained themselves out of being. "The supply chain," she said, "runs through at least 5 intermediary layers between Webb and the original source of the classified data. Webb is layer 3, Hutchins is layer 2. He was providing the access point inside the military system, but he was not originating the request." "Someone was telling Hutchins what to look for," Reynolds said. "Someone was paying Hutchins to look for specific things," she corrected. "There's a difference. Hutchins wasn't selecting targets. He was filling orders. Someone's shopping list, an extremely specific shopping list. 3 programs, all related to the same operational domain." She paused because what she was about to say required a moment of framing. "Major the 3 programs whose data was on Webb's drive, they are all related to autonomous targeting systems." Reynolds was very still. "Specifically," she said, "autonomous systems designed for high-density urban environments, the kind of system that changes fundamentally how a military force operates in a city." He stopped. A significant capability, she said. In the hands of a state actor with sufficient technical infrastructure to develop it further, it is a generational advantage. Reynolds looked at her. You're saying Iron Covenant was working for a state actor. I'm saying someone with resources and technical sophistication was directing their procurement, she said. The most likely candidates for that kind of principle are not domestic. They are foreign, and they are not small. The transport vehicle hit a curve in the road, and everyone shifted slightly. Martinez made a tight sound, and Tran said, "You okay?" And Martinez said, "I've had worse," in a tone that suggested he hadn't. Reynolds turned back to Emily. "How long have you suspected this?" he said. 3 weeks, she said. "I flagged it in an internal DIA memo. And I was told to continue mapping the domestic network and present my findings at the 6-week mark." Reynolds stared at her. "They made you wait." "They were managing the timeline," she said carefully, because she was not in the business of characterizing the decisions of her own organization in front of a special operations commander in a vehicle at 0400 hours in the morning. But she allowed herself to hold Reynolds' gaze and let the space between them carry what she wasn't saying out loud. Reynolds read it. "Somebody didn't want this moving too fast," he said. "I can't speculate about that," she said, "but you have." She looked at the tablet. "I've been speculating about it for 3 weeks," she said. "I just can't say it out loud in an official capacity until I have more." Reynolds turned back to face forward. He was quiet for a long moment. "Thread number 12, he said, sharply. He hadn't turned around. "I heard you," he said, "in building 1. You said it under your breath while you were working. Thread number 12. She hadn't known she'd said it aloud. "There are 11 individuals I've identified in the network beyond Webb and Hutchins," she said. "All of them are potentially active. None of them have been detained tonight. One of them, the one I've been calling thread number 12 because it's the one I can't fully trace, is connecting the domestic network to whoever is directing it from outside. And you don't know who thread 12 is." "Not yet," she said, "but you think you can find out." She thought about the data on Webb's drive, the purchasing records, the communication metadata, the single name that appeared in 3 separate documents in 3 separate encryption layers as an authentication signature, a name that was not Gerald Hutchins and was not Marcus Webb and was not anyone in Emily's existing network map, a name she had been staring at for the last 20 minutes without yet knowing what it meant. "Yes," she said, "I think I can find out." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Then find out," he said. She went back to the tablet. The transport continued down the mountain, and in the front seat, Reynolds sat with the data drive in his jacket pocket and thought about things he didn't say. And in the back, Emily Carter followed a thread in the dark the same way she did everything. All the way to where it led, Fort Liberty. The base looked different when you came back to it from something real. Emily had noticed this before, the way familiar places acquired a slightly altered quality after you had been somewhere that reminded you what stakes actually felt like. The buildings were the same. The lights were the same. The people moving through the early morning were the same people doing the same things they had been doing when Task Force Sentinel rolled out the night before. But it felt different, or she felt different inside it. She wasn't sure which. Martins was taken directly to the medical facility. Tron walking alongside the gurney, still talking steadily, still doing the thing he hadn't consciously decided to do. Hayes followed under formal protest Okafor, walking slightly behind him in the manner of a man who had decided that if Hayes tried to divert to the debrief room instead of the examination room, he was prepared to physically redirect him. Kowalski disappeared in the direction of the showers with the efficiency of a man who had a clear priority list and was executing it. That left Reynolds, Emily, and 2 intelligence officers from the base who had been waiting for their arrival. The intelligence officers were both men Emily recognized from her DIA attachment, senior analyst Carter Wright, who was her nominal supervisor on this assignment, and had the particular quality of someone who had been sitting in a warm building for the last 4 hours watching a situation board, while people he was responsible for were in the field, and Deputy Director Marcus Hale, whose presence at 0512 hours on the morning following an operation was not something Emily had expected and was, she immediately understood, not accidental. Hale was in his late 50s with the kind of stillness that came from decades of managing rooms without appearing to manage them. He looked at Emily when she came in, and the look said something specific, something she was skilled enough to read and careful enough not to react to. It said, We need to talk about what you found. Carter, Hale said. Good to have you back. Sir, she said. Major Reynolds. He shook Reynolds' hand. Exceptional work tonight. I understand the mission achieved all primary objectives. Reynolds looked at Hale the way he had been looking at things all night, carefully, completely. With some help, he said. I hear that's an understatement, Hale said. A pause that was slightly too long to be comfortable. Can I have 5 minutes with my analyst, Major, Hale said, and then we'll need you for a brief debrief before you stand your team down. Reynolds looked at Emily. Something passed between them, brief, real, the kind of thing that has no name but exists in the space between two people who have been through something together and are now being separated by the machinery of institution. 5 minutes, Reynolds said to Hale. He walked toward the debrief room without looking back. Emily stood with Hale. Carter Wright had positioned himself slightly to the left and behind Hale, the positioning of a man who was present but not driving the conversation. Emily noted it and set it aside. Tell me what you found, Hale said. She told him. She walked him through the drive data, the procurement patterns, the 3 programs, the autonomous targeting systems. She told him about the authentication signature that appeared across 3 documents in 3 encryption layers. She told him what it suggested about the nature of Iron Covenant's backing and the likely identity of the principal directing it. Hale listened. I was very good at listening in the way that senior intelligence officials were good at listening, absorbing everything while revealing nothing. The blank-faced reception of information that could mean anything until you understood what they were going to do with it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The authentication signature, he said. You haven't shared that with Reynolds. No, sir. Or with anyone else on the task force. No. Good. A pause. I need you to keep that between us for the moment. The signature needs to be verified through DIA channels before we expand the distribution. Emily looked at him. There was the thread, not thread 12, something else, something closer. Because Hale had just asked her to withhold information from a special operations team that had nearly died on a mountain tonight because of withheld information. And he had asked her to withhold it in a way that was technically entirely within protocol verification, before distribution, standard procedure, and had absolutely nothing technically wrong with it. And yet, sir, she said carefully, the signature appears in 3 separate documents with 3 separate encryption layers. The redundancy suggests it's a deliberate identifier, not an artifact. The probability of it being spurious is less than 3%, which means there's a 3% chance we'd be distributing unverified intelligence. Which also means there's a 97% chance we're sitting on actionable intelligence that 11 currently undetained network members don't know we have, she said. Every hour that information doesn't move is an hour they're not moving. Hale looked at her. The look was not unfriendly. It was the look of a man making a calculation. You've had a long night, Carter, he said. Yes, sir. I want you to go get some rest. We'll debrief fully in 6 hours. By then I'll have the verification framework in place and we can discuss distribution. 6 hours, she said, 6 hours. She nodded. She did not agree. But she nodded because the difference between those 2 things was something she had learned to navigate a long time ago in this particular line of work. Yes, sir, she said. She walked out of the room. She did not go to rest. She went to the intelligence support room on the 2nd floor of the operations building, a room she had been issued keycard access to as part of her assignment to Task Force Sentinel, and she sat down in front of a secure terminal, and she opened her own analysis file, and she kept working. Because 6 hours was too long, and she knew it. And she suspected Hale knew it too. 0611 hours. The authentication signature was a personnel identifier. Emily had understood this as a hypothesis 20 minutes ago. Now working through the verification on her own, she was elevating it to a conclusion. The 3-character code embedded in the document headers was not a technical artifact and was not a randomly generated token. It was a format she recognized from a specific classification of military contracting documents, a personal authorization code, the kind assigned to individuals with the authority to sign off on sensitive procurement approvals. She had seen this format before. She pulled up the contracting authorization registry, a database she had access to through her DIA credentials, and ran the 3-character code. The system returned a result in 11 seconds. Emily stared at it. She read it again. She read it a 3rd time, not because she had misread it, but because she was doing the thing you do when a piece of information is so significant that your brain requires multiple passes to accept it as real. The authorization code belonged to a Colonel Richard Stavros Defense Logistics Agency, currently serving as Deputy Director of Supply Chain Oversight for the Eastern Military District. The Eastern Military District, Fort Liberty's parent command. Colonel Richard Stavros had authority over Gerald Hutchins' contracting division. Colonel Richard Stavros had clearance for all three programs whose data was on Webb's drive. Colonel Richard Stavros was, according to his personnel file, currently on administrative leave pending review of an unrelated contracting irregularity that had been flagged 8 weeks ago, 2 weeks before Emily's December intercept. Her hands went very still on the keyboard. Thread number 12 had a name, and the name was not someone deep in the shadows. The name was someone who had been 8 weeks ago placed on administrative leave, effectively quarantined, effectively under watch by the very system he was compromising, which meant either the system had already found him and was managing it quietly, or someone in the system had put him on administrative leave for reasons that had nothing to do with Iron Covenant and had inadvertently moved him away from the access channels before Emily's investigation could connect him to the network. Both possibilities were significant. Neither possibility was safe. She picked up her phone. She called Reynolds. He answered on the second ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. "Carter, I found thread 12, she said, a short silence. "Where are you?" he said. "Intel support room, second floor ops building." "I'm coming to you." The line went dead. She went back to the terminal and kept pulling. Stavros's administrative leave record, his travel history for the past 6 months, his communication logs, the ones she had access to, which were the official logs, which were not the same thing as the complete picture, but were something. His personnel connections, his former assignments, his contracting authorization history. A pattern emerged that was both clearer and worse than she had expected. Stavros had been authorizing procurement approvals for a shell company that appeared in Iron Covenant's financial network under 3 different names over the past 18 months. The approvals were small individually, each one plausibly deniable as a routine logistics decision, but aggregated, they represented a systematic channeling of classified contract data through a legal cover that Webb's network could monetize with the right buyers. He wasn't just thread 12. How was the architecture? Webb's network was the distribution channel. Hutchins was the access point. But Stavros was the person who had built the system from the inside, who had understood exactly which approvals to sign, which databases to touch, which classifications to navigate, and how to do all of it in a way that looked like ordinary bureaucratic activity until someone with Emily's particular combination of skills and access was looking for it specifically. Reynolds came through the door. There's a door at 629 hours. He had changed out of his tactical gear and was wearing base fatigues that looked like they had been put on quickly and without particular attention. His face had the quality of someone who had not slept and had not expected to. He read the screen over her shoulder. He read it twice. "Stavros," he said. "Yes. He's on administrative leave. Since 8 weeks ago." "Who put him on administrative leave?" "The review board at Eastern Military District Headquarters. The stated reason is a contracting irregularity that has nothing to do with Iron Covenant." Reynolds looked at her. "Coincidence." "In my experience," Emily said, "coincidences in intelligence work are usually one of 2 things. Either they're actually coincidences, which happens less often than people think, or they're the visible part of something someone is already managing that you didn't know existed. You think someone else already knows about Stavros. I think someone may have found a thread that led towards Stavros 8 weeks ago and made a decision about how to manage it that did not include informing my analysis team," she said. Reynolds straightened. "You mean Hale," he said. The room was very quiet. She had not said Hale's name. She had not implied Hale's name. She had stated the facts and let Reynolds' mind do what his mind did, which was move quickly and cleanly through information toward conclusions. She had not intended him to arrive at that conclusion, but she could not say he was wrong. "I mean someone," she said carefully. "I can't speculate beyond what the data supports." "Carter," his voice was very quiet, "Hale asked you to withhold the authentication signature. He asked me to hold distribution pending verification. That's not the same thing as what you just said." "No," she agreed, "it's not." Reynolds moved to the chair across from her and sat down. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. The posture of someone who is running a calculation that doesn't have an easy answer. If Hale already knows about Stavros, he said slowly, and has been managing that knowledge for 8 weeks without sharing it, then the question is why, Emily said. And the answer is either that he's protecting an ongoing operation against Stavros that my mission would have compromised. He paused. Or something worse. She didn't respond to that. Because the something worse was the thing she had been sitting with for the last 40 minutes, the thing she had been turning over very carefully, the way you turn over something potentially explosive with absolute attention to every angle before you commit to a direction. If Hale knew about Stavros, if Hale had known for 8 weeks, and if during those 8 weeks he had not moved against Stavros, had not expanded the investigation, had not informed Emily's analysis team, despite their active work on the exact same network, then either he was running a parallel operation that was legitimately classified above Emily's access level, or he was the reason Stavros was still free. The second option was not one Emily could say out loud yet, not without more. I need 2 more hours, she said. Reynolds looked at her. The debrief is at 1100, he said. Hale will expect you there. I know. If you're not there, he'll come looking. I know that too. And if he comes looking before you have what you need, then I have what I have, she said, which is already considerably more than I had yesterday. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what do you need from me? She looked at him. This man who had told her to stay with the command element, who had told her to observe and report and let the operators handle the fighting, who had given her an order based on a category and a title and a set of assumptions that had taken approximately 45 minutes of reality to dismantle completely. This man who, when the dismantling was complete, had not flinched, who had looked at the new information and recalibrated cleanly and quickly and without the defensive resistance that a lot of people would have brought to the same moment. Keep your team accessible, she said. Not on standby. I don't want that to register anywhere. Just don't let them scatter too far. If I'm right about what I'm seeing, this is not over. Reynolds nodded. Done, he said. He stood to leave. Major, she said. He turned. When Okafor said, 3rd time last night after Webb surfaced, and I was already standing there. Reynolds looked at her. He said he'd been attached to 3 analysts. 1 saved time, 1 panicked, 1 turned out to be more than expected. He knew, she said, before the mission. He knew something about me. Okafor knows things, Reynolds said. I've stopped trying to understand how. He left. Emily turned back to the terminal. She had 2 hours. She used them the way she used everything. 0731 hours. The second thing she found was worse than the first. She almost missed it. It was buried in the financial flow data from Webb's drive, a single transaction. Record, 6 months old, that moved through 4 intermediary accounts in 3 different jurisdictions before it landed in a domestic account that had no obvious connection to anything in Emily's network map. The account was registered to a financial holding entity with a 40-character registration number that meant nothing until she ran it against a cross-referencing tool and found that the same entity had appeared in a DIA financial monitoring report from 14 months ago. A report that had been submitted by Emily's predecessor on the Iron Covenant analysis, a senior analyst named Thomas Greer, who had worked the account for 4 months before being reassigned to a different desk 6 months before Emily inherited the file. Greer's report had flagged the entity. His recommendation had been to expand surveillance. His recommendation had been approved by his supervisory chain. And then 12 days later, the entity had been removed from the active surveillance list without explanation. Emily pulled the authorization record for the removal. The authorization had been signed by Deputy Director Marcus Hale. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she pulled Thomas Greer's reassignment record. Greer had been moved from the Iron Covenant analysis to a signals intelligence desk covering a geographic region completely unrelated to domestic networks, a lateral move that made no sense professionally, that reduced his access to everything he had been building, and that had happened 12 days after his report flagged the financial entity that Emily was now looking at. 12 days. The same 12 days between the flag and the removal from surveillance. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. She was not someone who panicked. She had trained herself out of it the same way she had trained herself into everything else, with repetition and discipline, and the understanding that panic was simply fear that hadn't been given a job yet. She gave this fear a job. She started documenting, not in the DIA system, in a personal encrypted file on her own device that was not connected to any network she didn't control. Every piece of evidence, every document, every authorization record, every transaction, every timeline alignment, all of it organized and cross-referenced and annotated with the same precision she brought to every analysis she had ever done. She was 40 minutes into this documentation when her phone rang. Hale. She looked at the screen, waited 2 rings, answered. Carter, how are you feeling after last night? Functional, sir, she said, getting some rest as recommended. Good. A pause. I'm moving the debrief to 900. Some developments overnight I need the team briefed on. Her pulse did not change. Of course, sir, I'll be there. Get some food first if you can, he said. It's going to be a long morning. Thank you, sir. She ended the call. She looked at the clock. 90 minutes to 0900. She went back to documenting. At 0822 hours, she sent the complete file encrypted, triple redundant through a secure channel that was not DIA infrastructure to 2 separate recipients. The first was an attorney she had retained personally 6 months ago for reasons she had told herself at the time were precautionary. She understood now they were not precautionary, they were anticipatory. She had known on some level that the thread she was following led somewhere that would require documentation to be somewhere safe before the moment of confrontation arrived. The second recipient was someone whose name she would not write down or say aloud in any context that could be recorded. Someone outside DIA, someone who would know what to do with what she had sent. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her tablet, the clean one, the one with only what Hale expected her to have, and she walked to the door of the Intel support room. She paused. She turned back. She looked at the terminal one more time at the network map she had built over 6 weeks. In one night, the threads she had traced and the threads she had not yet traced, and the one thread that ran through all of them right back to a name she had not expected. She took a screenshot on her personal device. Then she walked out. 0842 hours. Operations Building Conference Room, B. Reynolds was already there when she arrived. Okafor beside him and Hayes' arm in a proper sling, looking like he had won an argument with the medical staff that he probably shouldn't have won on the opposite side of the table. Kowalski in the corner. Tran near the door. Carter Wright was setting up a briefing display. Hale was not yet in the room. Emily came in, found a chair across from Reynolds and sat down. Reynolds looked at her, a single questioning look. She gave him a small nod. His eyes moved away. The door opened and Hale came in, followed by 2 individuals Emily did not recognize, both in civilian clothes, both with the particular posture of people who were used to being in rooms without being the most visible person in them. Thank you all for your time this morning, Hale said. I know it's been a short night. I'll make this as efficient as possible. He looked around the room. First outstanding work last night. Webb in custody. The data secured. No fatalities. That is an exceptional outcome given the circumstances. He looked at Emily when he said the last part. Second, he said, I want to address the intelligence picture going forward. With Webb and Hutchins in custody, the domestic network is significantly degraded. Our assessment is that the remaining members will either stand down or scatter. We will be monitoring, but the acute threat is considered resolved. Reynolds said, what about the foreign backing? Hale's expression did not change. We're pursuing that through appropriate channels. What channels? Channels that I'm not at liberty to detail in this setting, Hale said smoothly. Major Reynolds, I understand the operational instinct to follow every thread to its conclusion, and I respect it. But intelligence work sometimes requires a different timeline than direct action. Reynolds looked at Emily. Emily looked at Hale. Sir, she said, I'd like to ask about Colonel Stavros. The room changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it changed the way rooms change when a word enters them that was not expected to enter them. Hale looked at her. His face did not move. Where did you hear that name? The data drive recovered from Marcus Webb, she said. His authorization code appears in 3 separate documents within the drive. I identified it at approximately 0631 this morning. A pause. I thought I asked you to hold that pending verification, Hale said. His voice was still smooth, still controlled. But underneath it's something else, the sound of a man whose timeline has just been disrupted. You asked me to hold distribution, Emily said. I verified it through the contracting authorization registry. The match is confirmed. Another pause. Longer. Why didn't you bring that to me directly? Hale said. I'm bringing it to you now, sir, she said, in front of witnesses. The room was absolutely still. Reynolds sat forward slightly. Hale looked at Emily with the look of a man who has just recalibrated everything. The look she had seen last night on Reynolds' face, but with a different quality underneath it. Reynolds had recalibrated because he was wrong, and he knew it. Hale was recalibrating because she had moved faster than he expected, and he was working out what that meant for him. Stavros, Hale said finally, is being handled. Who's handling him, Reynolds said. An active operation that I cannot discuss. Because it's classified, Reynolds said, or because it doesn't exist. The two people in civilian clothes who had come in with Hale were now paying a very specific kind of attention to this conversation. Hale looked at Reynolds. Major, I strongly advise you to. I'd like to know, Reynolds said, why an analyst on your team flagged a financial entity in the Iron Covenant network 14 months ago, was reassigned 12 days later, and the entity was simultaneously removed from active surveillance. On your authorization. The room, the silence. Hale's face, that professional, managed, completely controlled face, made a small movement. Almost nothing. A tightening around the eyes that lasted less than a second. But Emily saw it, and Reynolds saw it. That information is from a classified administrative file, Hale said, which my analyst accessed through her standard DIA credentials, Reynolds said, which means it's accessible to anyone at her level, which means if it's sensitive enough that you're concerned she found it, it should have been classified higher. Hale looked at Emily. You've been busy this morning, he said. I've been working, she said. Sir. One of the two civilian-clothed individuals moved. Not toward the door, toward the table. He put a credentials wallet on the table in front of Hale quietly, without drama, the way you do something that has been planned. Emily looked at the credentials. Department of Justice, Inspector General's office. She let out a breath so small that only someone sitting directly beside her would have heard it. The second recipient of her 0812 file. They had moved faster than she'd expected, which meant they had already been into position, which meant she had not been the only person who knew where this thread led. Hale looked at the credentials, then at Emily, then at Reynolds, who was watching him with the steady, calm expression of a man who has processed a great deal of new information very quickly and has arrived somewhere clear. Deputy Director Hale, the man from the Inspector General's office, said quietly, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the room. Hale stood. I was composed. She had to give him that. He stood with a composure that was either the composure of a man who had a plan she hadn't anticipated, or the composure of a man who had already made peace with the possibility of this moment. At the door, he stopped. He looked at Emily one last time. You were supposed to be a desk analyst, what he said. I know, she said. He left. The room erupted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the particular kinetic energy of many people, processing many things at the same time. Tran said something to Kowalski that Emily didn't catch. Hayes said quietly to no one in particular, did that just, and didn't finish the sentence. Okafor said nothing because Okafor was Okafor, but he looked at Emily with an expression that was in its way more articulate than anything any of them had said. Carter Wright, Emily's nominal supervisor, was staring at the door that Hale had walked through with the expression of a man who was reconstructing everything he thought he understood about his own organization. Reynolds stood up. He walked around the table. He stopped in front of Emily. She looked up at him. The 11 remaining network members, he said. They'll be moving now, she said. If any of them have any connection to Hale, they'll know their timeline has compressed. How long do we have? She thought about it. Hours, she said, not days. Reynolds turned to the IG official. What do you need from us? Primarily from her, the man said, looking at Emily. But yes, from you as well. Reynolds looked at his team. At Okafor, at Hayes with his sling, at Tran and Kowalski and Wright. He looked at Emily. Then we're not done, he said. And it wasn't a question. Conference room B, Fort Liberty. The man from the Inspector General's office had a name. Special Agent David Mercer. He said it plainly, the way people say their names when the name itself is less important than what they represent, and what he represented right now was something that had not fully landed in the room yet. The presence of a federal oversight investigation into a sitting DIA deputy director inside a special operations installation on the morning after a mission that had just blown open a network nobody had fully mapped. Mercer was in his mid-40s. He had the kind of economy of movement that Emily associated with people who had been doing difficult work in difficult places for long enough that efficiency had become involuntary. His colleague, a woman he introduced only as Agent Reyes, had positioned herself near the door in a way that looked casual and was not. "I want to be clear about what we have and what we don't have," Mercer said once Hale was out of the room and the door was closed. He looked at Emily. "Your file this morning was the confirmation we needed, but we've been building towards this for 11 weeks. Reynolds said 11 weeks. "Correct. And you couldn't tell D." "We could not tell DIM," Mercer said, "because the compromise inside D was the investigation." The room processed that. Trans said under his breath to no one in particular, "So the people investigating the leak were the leak." "Hale was not the originating leak," Mercer said. "Stavros was. Hale's role was different. He was managing the knowledge of the leak in a way that protected Stavros from exposure long enough for the foreign buyers to take delivery of the autonomous targeting data." He paused. "In exchange for considerations that we are still quantifying." "Money," Reynolds said flatly. "Primarily, yes." "And Greer," Emily said, "Thomas Greer, the analyst who flagged the financial entity 14 months ago." Mercer looked at her. "We're aware of Greer. He's cooperating with us." "He knew he was being moved because he got too close." "He suspected it," Mercer said. "He didn't have enough to act on, so he documented everything he had and he waited." A pause. "He's the one who made the initial contact with our office 8 months ago." Emily thought about this, about a man she had never met, working a case she had inherited, who had hit a wall and found a way around it by going outside the system entirely, who had spent 8 months watching and waiting while Emily worked the same network from below, not knowing what he had already started above. Two people following the same thread from different ends, both headed toward the same answer. "Stavros," Reynolds said. "Where is he now?" "Currently at his residence in Arlington under passive surveillance," Mercer said. "He doesn't know we have the authorization codes. As of this morning, the only people who knew about those codes were Webb, Hutchins, Hale." He looked at Emily. "And Carter." "And now this room," Emily said. "And now this room," Mercer agreed, "which is why I need everyone here to understand something very clearly. What I'm about to describe cannot leave these walls through any channel until I give clearance. Not official reports, not after-action documentation, not informal conversation." He looked around the room. "Is that understood?" Every person in the room said yes in some form. Reynolds said at last. He said it looking at Mercer with the expression of a man who was agreeing because the logic was sound and not because he was accustomed to deferring to anyone. "Stavros's administrative leave was not coincidental," Mercer said. "We arranged it. 8 weeks ago, we had enough on the financial entity to move him away from the access channels without tipping him to the investigation. The goal was to cut off the data flow without alerting the buyers that we were onto them." "Did it work?" Hayes said. His voice was careful, the voice of a man who had been shot the previous night and was now sitting in a room finding out that the mission he had been shot on was connected to something considerably larger. "Partially," Mercer said. "The data flow slowed significantly, but Stavros still had communication channels we hadn't fully mapped, and our assessment is that he was able to arrange at least 2 additional data transfers through Webb's network in the 6 weeks between his leave and last night." "The 3 programs on the drive," Emily said. 2 of them were recent, yes. "Which means the buyers already have 2 of the 3 autonomous targeting specifications," she said. "Correct." The room went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that descends when a number becomes fully real, when 2 out of 3 stops being a fraction and becomes a weight. "Who are the buyers?" Reynolds said. "That is the question we are still working to answer," Mercer said. "We have strong indicators of the nation-state involved. We are not at a point where I can name it in this room." "But it's a nation-state," Reynolds said, "not a non-state actor." "Correct, Shalom. So whatever domestic extremist front Iron Covenant was presenting to the world was exactly that," Mercer said. "A front. The individuals inside the Mountain facility last night were true believers. They genuinely subscribed to Iron Covenant's ideology. But the ideology was also useful to the network's principles because it provided a domestic explanation for activities that were at root foreign intelligence operations." Trans spoke up. So the people we fought last night thought they were fighting for a domestic cause. Most of them, Mercer said. Webb knew the full picture. Hutchins knew enough of it. The fighters inside the facility knew only what Webb told them. And what did Webb tell them, Tran said? That they were going to destroy an American Special Operations team on American soil and prove that the government could not protect itself from the people it had betrayed. Mercer paused. It was not a difficult message to sell to men who already believed it. Tran was quiet after that. Emily looked at him. He was doing what she had watched him do all night, processing not on the surface, but somewhere deeper, where things become part of you rather than just things you know. The 11 remaining network members, Reynolds said. Carter told me we have hours. She's right, Mercer said. Hale's removal from this room is going to generate a signal. We manage the extraction. Carefully, he is being detained for questioning, not arrested, and the public justification is a routine administrative matter. But Stavros is careful. He watches for signals. He looked at Emily again. He's been watching for 3 months. He'll run, Emily said. Our assessment is he'll try to access a data dead drop before he runs. There is classified information he has not yet been able to transfer that he will not want to leave behind. A dead drop where, Reynolds said, that is what we have not yet established, Mercer said. We have 3 probable locations based on his pattern of movement over the past 6 weeks. We can cover 2 of them. He stopped. The implication landed. 3 locations, 2 teams. Reynolds said, what do you need from us? Mercer looked at him. I need your team for the 3rd location. Not a combat operation. Stavros is not a combatant, and the legal framework around this is specific. I need surveillance and detainment capacity. If he shows up and moves toward that location, I need people who can take him into custody before he accesses whatever is there. Where is the 3rd location? Reynolds said. Fort Liberty, Mercer said. The room went entirely still. The dead drop is on base, Emily said slowly. We believe so, yes. Which means Stavros has access to this installation. He has a valid installation pass that was not revoked when he went on administrative leave, Mercer said. That was a deliberate decision on our part. Revoking it would have alerted him. Reynolds looked at Mercer with an expression that was controlled in the particular way that controlled expressions are when what's underneath them is not controlled at all. There is a foreign intelligence asset, Reynolds said carefully, with a valid pass to walk onto this installation today, right now. Yes, Mercer said, and you waited until this morning to tell me. We waited until we had a reason to bring you into the operation, Mercer said. Last night's mission created that reason. Reynolds stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment with his back to the room. Emily watched him and understood exactly what he was doing. He was taking approximately 15 seconds to feel what he needed to feel about this, and then converting it into something he could use. She had seen him do this version of the same thing 3 times in the last 12 hours. It was one of the things that made him, beneath the command face and the assumptions and the dismissal, genuinely excellent at what he did. He turned around. Tell me about the 3rd location, he said. 10:17 hours. The 3rd location was a record storage facility in the administrative sector of Fort Liberty, a building so unremarkable that Emily had walked past it twice in the 2 months she had been attached to the base without registering it as anything other than infrastructure. Mercer's intelligence placed a data cache inside the records facility, specifically inside a document archive box in storage row 7 that had been inventoried and sealed 18 months ago and had not been opened since. The box contained what Stavros believed was his insurance, a secondary copy of everything he had transmitted, preserved in a format that could be recovered even if the primary network was compromised. If Stavros was running, he would want that insurance. If he wanted that insurance, he would come here. Emily sat in the surveillance vehicle with Reynolds and Okafor and watched the building's single entrance through a camera feed on her tablet, and she thought about the 11 remaining network members. And she thought about Mercer's 2 teams covering the other 2 locations, and she thought about the fact that this was the location Mercer had assigned to them. Not because it was the least important, because it was the most likely. She had said, when Mercer walked them through the probability assessment. She had looked at Stavros's pattern of movement, the 6 weeks of data she had pulled from the personnel logs, and she had seen what Mercer's team had seen, but weighted differently. Stavros was methodical. He planned. He prepared contingencies, and he prepared contingencies for his contingencies. A man like that did not run without his insurance. He would go to the insurance first. And the insurance on the installation, the closest, most immediately accessible cash, was the first place he would go. "How long has it been?" Reynolds said from the front seat. 32 minutes, Okafor said. "Mercer's teams, both at their locations, no contact yet." Emily kept her eyes on the tablet. "He knows something is wrong," she said. "The question is what signal he received and how long ago." "You think he's already moving," Reynolds said. "I think he was already moving before we sat down in that conference room," she said. Hale's removal would have generated a signal even if Mercer managed it carefully. Stavros had a contingency protocol for exactly this scenario. "Then why isn't he here yet?" "Because he's not running in a straight line," she said. "He's running in a pattern that looks like ordinary behavior. He drives to a coffee shop. He makes a phone call. He stops at the commissary. Each stop is normal. Collectively, they're a route that ends here." "He's covering his approach," Okafor said. "He's been covering his approach for 3 months," Emily said. "Every time he's been on this installation since he went on administrative leave, he's moved in a way that could be explained as routine. Today is the same, just faster." "How much faster?" Reynolds said. She looked at the movement patterns she had been building on her tablet for the past 20 minutes, cross-referencing with the base access logs that Mercer had given them. "Stavros's access card was used at the main gate 11 minutes ago," she said. Reynolds turned to look at her. "He's on base," she said. "Now." The silence in the vehicle lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Reynolds was on the radio to Mercer. "Stavros is on the installation. Confirmed gate access 11 minutes ago. We believe he is inbound to location 3. Mercer's voice came back tightly. "Understood. My teams are 20 minutes from your location. Do not approach until—" "He'll be in and out in 15, Reynolds said. "If we wait for your teams, he walks." "Major Reynolds, I need to remind you that the legal framework on this is my problem," Reynolds said. "You'll have him in custody. Figure out the framework after." He clicked off. He looked at Emily. "Tell me what he looks like walking in there," he said. "What is he wearing? What is he carrying? How does he move?" Emily pulled up Stavros's file photograph, a formal service photograph from 8 months ago, the last one in his record. She had been looking at it on and off for the past hour. She had memorized it the way she memorized things she needed. 6 feet even, 192 pounds in the service photo, probably less. Now stress tends to thin people out. Gray hair cut short and precise. He'll be wearing civilian clothes because he is on administrative leave, and coming onto an installation in uniform would draw more attention than it deflects. She thought about his movement pattern. He'll walk at a consistent pace, not slow enough to look careful, not fast enough to look urgent. He's done this before, and he knows exactly what normal looks like. "He'll have a bag," Okafor said. "Yes, something ordinary. Shoulder bag or backpack large enough to carry what he needs out of that box without looking like he's carrying anything significant." "He'll be alone," Reynolds said. "He cannot afford to have anyone with him for this," Emily said. "Whatever he told his network this particular moment is his and his alone. The insurance is his, and he will not share it." Reynolds nodded. He looked at Okafor. Okafor looked at Emily. "You should stay with the vehicle," Reynolds said. She looked at him. "I mean it this time," he said. "Not because of what I said in the briefing room last night, because Stavros knows your work. If he gets close enough to identify you before we can take him, he runs and we lose the approach window." Emily thought about this. She didn't like it, but she recognized that he was right. "Fine," she said, "but I keep the camera feed." "You keep the camera feed," he agreed. He and Okafor moved. Emily watched the feed. 10:43 hours. Stavros appeared on the camera at 10:43 hours and 12 seconds. He was exactly as she had described. Civilian clothes, dark jacket, khaki pants, the kind of outfit that fit everywhere and nowhere. A shoulder bag, black, medium size. He walked at the pace she had predicted, controlled, consistent, the pace of a man who had internalized what ordinary looked like and was producing it from memory. He did not look around. That was the tell. Ordinary people glance around in spaces they're navigating. They check doors, they look at signage, they make small adjustments in response to the environment. Stavros moved through the space with the fixed attention of someone who had memorized the layout and was executing a memorized route, and was not allowing himself to engage with anything that was not part of that route, because engaging with the environment meant noticing things, and noticing things meant risk. "He's at the door," Emily said into the radio. "Reynolds from inside the building. We have him on visual." Stavros went inside. The camera feed from inside the building, Mercer's team had placed 2 cameras, which Emily now had access to on her tablet, picked him up in the main corridor, moving toward the administrative access desk. The desk was staffed by a young specialist who greeted Stavros the way you greet someone with a valid pass in an authority-bearing demeanor, which was to say, without particular attention. "Colonel Stavros," the specialist said, not looking up from his screen. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Just picking up some archive materials," Stavros said. His voice was calm, even, utterly unremarkable. Emily watched him sign the access log, something he did not have to do, but did anyway because a man who does not sign the log when he is supposed to draws more attention than a man who does, and moved through the interior door toward the archive section. Reynolds' voice in her earpiece, "He's in. Storage row 7, she said. He'll go directly there." The interior camera picked up Stavros entering the archive section. He moved to row 7 without hesitation. He found the box. He broke the inventory seal. Emily saw him do it, saw the precise practice motion of a man who had planned this movement many times and opened the box. He reached inside, and then he stopped. He froze, because the box was empty. Emily understood what had happened in the fraction of a second before Reynolds' voice came through the earpiece. "Mercer's team cleared the box last night," Reynolds said quietly. "Before we arrived this morning, the cache is already in federal custody." Stavros stood over an empty box in row 7 of a records archive on a military installation where every exit was currently being watched. And in the surveillance vehicle 40 meters away, Emily watched his hands. She watched his hands because hands are what people do things with when their plans dissolve. His right hand moved to his jacket pocket. "He has something on him," she said into the radio. "Right jacket pocket. He's going for it." "Got him," Okafor said. The interior camera showed 2 figures moving into the archive section from opposite ends. Reynolds from the main corridor, Okafor from the emergency access door at the back. Stavros heard them. He turned. He looked at Reynolds first, then at Okafor, then at the empty box. The calculation on his face was visible even through the camera, even in low resolution, even at this angle. She could see him running the numbers. She could see him finding the answer. He had been here before this moment. He had built his entire career on finding the move that the situation hadn't closed off yet. But this was a small room, and Reynolds was between him and the only exit that mattered. "Colonel Stavros," Reynolds said, his voice was completely level. "I'm going to ask you to take your hand out of your jacket pocket." Stavros looked at him. "Who are you?" Stavros said. "Major Daniel Reynolds, Task Force Sentinel." Stavros absorbed this. "Task Force Sentinel, he repeated slowly. "You were on the mountain last night." "Yes." "And you found something." "Yes." Stavros looked at the empty box, then back at Reynolds. "You found more than something," he said. It was not quite a question. "Carter found it," Reynolds said. "She's been working your network for 6 weeks. She found the authentication codes. She connected them to you." Stavros was quiet for a long moment. "Carter," he said, "the DIA analyst." "Among other things," Reynolds said, echoing what Emily herself had said to Webb 8 hours ago in the snow. "I knew about her," Stavros said. "Hale told me she was working the Iron Covenant account. He said she was good." "He was right," Reynolds said. "He said she was containable," Stavros said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Hand," Okafor said from behind him. Quiet, final. Stavros took his hand out of his jacket pocket, empty. He held both hands up with the particular composure of a man who had known somewhere in the planning that this was one of the possible endings, who had accepted it as a variable, who was now executing the contingency for this scenario with the same methodical calm he had applied to everything else. "I want counsel," he said. "You'll have it," Reynolds said. "Step away from the box." He stepped away from the box. At 1:47 hours, Colonel Richard Stavros was taken into custody inside a records archive at Fort Liberty by a special operations team that had been on a mountain in Colorado 6 hours earlier. Emily watched it happen on the camera feed. She did not cheer. She did not feel the surge of satisfaction that she had learned to expect from people who had never done this kind of work. People who hadn't done this kind of work expected the moment of capture to feel like a conclusion, a release of something that had been building. What it actually felt like was the closing of one door and the awareness that several others were still open. 11 network members, foreign buyers with 2 out of 3 autonomous targeting specifications, a dead drop that had been cleared but implied others existed. And Hale, who was in federal custody, yes, but who had been building his relationship with Stavros for long enough that there were almost certainly aspects of that relationship that neither Emily nor Mercer had yet found. She opened a new file on her tablet and started typing. Because the work did not stop when the target was in custody. The work stopped when the threat was resolved, and the threat was not yet resolved. Less than 122 hours. Mercer arrived at the records building 11 minutes after the detainment, which was 20 minutes after he had said his teams were 20 minutes away. A discrepancy that Emily noted and attributed either to traffic or to the calculated deployment of a man who understood that Reynolds' team was more than capable of handling the situation without federal backup on the doorstep. He looked at Stavros, now seated in a chair with Agent Reyes at his side, and looked at the empty box and looked at Reynolds. Clean, he said. Clean, Reynolds said. He put up resistance. He reached into his jacket. And Okafor reminded him of his options. Mercer looked at Okafor. Okafor said nothing. Mercer looked at the empty box. The cache was cleared at 03:30 hours this morning, before your team returned from the mountain. Stavros didn't know because we pulled the inventory seal and replaced it. He noticed when he opened it, Reynolds said. I imagine so. Mercer looked at Stavros. Colonel, I want you to know that we have the full contents of the box. We also have the authentication codes from the web drive. We also have the financial transfer records from the past 18 months. He paused. We have quite a lot. Stavros looked at the floor. He did not respond. I want to give you an opportunity, Mercer said, before this moves to a place where opportunities become more limited. I need to understand the foreign buyers, not what you sold them. I have that. I need to understand who receives it on their end and what their development timeline looks like for the autonomous targeting specifications. Stavros raised his eyes. He looked at Mercer. Then for a long moment, he looked at Emily, who had come into the building from the surveillance vehicle and was standing near the doorway with her tablet in her hand. You're smaller than I expected, he said to her. She looked at him. I get that sometimes, she said. Hale said you were methodical, thorough. He said you would eventually find everything, but the timeline was manageable because you worked alone and reported through him. Stavros paused. He underestimated the timeline. I underestimated a few things, Emily said. He underestimated you specifically, Stavros said, which is apparently a common mistake. The room was very quiet. Mercer said, Colonel. Stavros looked away from Emily. He was quiet for a long moment, the quiet of a man arriving at a decision that had probably been sitting in front of him for some time and that he had been choosing not to look at directly. The buyers have a development team, he said finally. Mercer did not move. They have been working from the first specification for 7 months. The second specification arrived 3 weeks ago. At their current pace with both specifications integrated, they will have a functional prototype within 14 months. And the third specification, Mercer said, would have reduced that timeline to 8 months, Stavros said, which is why it was the priority. But they don't have it, Mercer said. No, Stavros said. Carter found it first. He said this without looking at Emily, but the room heard it. Every person in the room heard it, the particular weight of those 3 words from a man who had spent 18 months building something that had been dismantled in 6 weeks by a woman he had never met, who had found the thread he had buried in 3 separate encryption layers, who had followed it to him on a mountain at 0600 hours on a 2 hours of sleep after spending the night, before eliminating 8 enemy targets in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Reynolds looked at Emily. She did not look back at him. She was writing. 11:49 hours. Mercer took Stavros to a secure DIA facility for formal interrogation. Agent Reyes went with them, 2 additional federal agents who had been parked outside the records building the entire time. Emily had not noticed them until they moved, which she considered a professional acknowledgement fell in for transport. That left Reynolds, Okafor, Hayes, Tran, Kowalski, and Emily standing in a records archive that smelled of dust and old paper and the particular staleness of spaces where things are stored without being used. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Tran said, so what happens now? Nobody answered immediately. Now Mercer's team runs the interrogation, Reynolds said. Stavros talks or he doesn't. The 11 network members either get picked up or they get wind of what happened and run. And the buyers, Hayes said. The buyers are someone else's problem at a level above this room, Reynolds said. He said it in a tone that made clear what he thought about things being above the level of this room, and he did not say it again. What about Hale, Kowalski said. In federal custody, Reynolds said. Formal charges pending. And us, Tran said. Reynolds looked at the team. He looked at Hayes with his arm in a sling and Tran with the dried blood on his sleeve from where he had pressed his hand against Martinez's leg wound, and Kowalski with the bandage on his forearm that nobody had properly addressed yet. You go get checked out medically, Reynolds said. All of you, that's an order. Hayes, I don't want to hear that you argued with the doctor about... I won't argue with the doctor, Hayes said. You argued with Okafor for 40 minutes about arm elevation. Okafor is not a doctor. The sentiment transfers, Reynolds said. Go, all of you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The team filed out. Okafor was last. At the doorway, he stopped and looked at Emily. Are you all right, he said. She considered the question seriously because Okafor asked questions seriously and she had learned in the last 16 hours that he deserved serious answers. I will be, she said. He nodded once. Good, he said, and he left. That left Reynolds and Emily alone in row 7. Reynolds looked at the empty box that had once held Stavros's insurance and now held nothing. He said Hale underestimated the timeline, Reynolds said. He did, Emily said. How much faster did you move than they expected? Emily thought about this. About the December intercept that had been waiting on her desk when she returned from a week's leave, the one she had picked up on a Tuesday afternoon and started working before she had even taken off her coat. About the 6 weeks of meticulous, solitary work that had moved faster than Hale expected, because Emily Carter worked the way she did everything completely without stopping, following every thread, every direction until it either terminated or connected to something real. I think they expected 3 months, she said, maybe 4, enough time for Stavros to complete the final transfer. Instead, you found the authentication codes in 2 hours on a drive you weren't supposed to have, Reynolds said. 6 weeks of context made the 2 hours possible, she said. Without the context, the codes would have looked like a technical artifact. And if Webb's drive had never been recovered, she thought about this, then Stavros might have had his 14 months, she said, with the 3rd specification, and the buyers would have had something that changes how armies fight in cities. She paused, which is to say everything depended on last night going right. Last night almost went very wrong, Reynolds said. Yeah, she said. It did. He was quiet for a moment. If Hayes hadn't been hit, he said slowly, if the machine gun hadn't been the threat it was, if the situation had stayed within the parameters I planned for, he stopped. I would have kept you in the command element, watching. You never would have had the opportunity to... No, she said, and Webb would have slipped the tunnel while I was still inside clearing the facility. Probably. And Stavros would still have his cash. Yes, he looked at her. The ambush, he said, the one that nearly killed my team. The one that put Hayes down and wounded Martinez and trapped Tron in that building. The one that someone in this chain of command set us up for. Yes, she said. It's the reason we found everything, he said. She held his gaze. Yes, she said quietly, it is. The weight of that sat between them, the terrible, specific weight of understanding that the thing that nearly destroyed you was also the thing that made the outcome possible. That the ambush Hutchins had helped arrange the trap that Stavros had perhaps known about, perhaps sanctioned, had put Task Force Sentinel in exactly the circumstances that allowed Emily to do what she did. To be seen, to be necessary, to find the thread. Reynolds looked at the empty box one more time. Martinez is going to be fine, he said. The doctor confirmed this morning, clean through and through, he'll be back on duty in 8 weeks. Good, she said. Hayes is going to be fine. Kowalski's forearm shrapnel is apparently less significant than he made it seem, which means it was probably more significant than he wanted anyone to think. He paused. Tran is going to be different. Not worse, different. The kind of different that happens when something you've prepared for actually arrives. He held, Emily said. He held, Reynolds agreed. Every one of them held. She looked at him. So did you, she said. He absorbed this. I made mistakes, he said, in the briefing room, in the field. You also corrected them, she said, in real time, Under pressure. That's not nothing. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she had learned over the course of this night to read correctly. Not the command face, not the controlled exterior, but the man underneath it, who was she understood considerably more complicated and considerably more real than the rank on his collar suggested. I owe you an apology, he said. No, she said. Carter. I don't need an apology, she said. I need the work to matter. It matters. She paused. That's enough. Reynolds held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he straightened. The after-action report, he said, is going to require some explaining, she said, echoing what he had said to her in Building 1 5 hours ago. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something less than a smile, but more than nothing. Yeah, he said, it is. He started toward the door. He stopped. Carter, the 11 remaining network members. I've been running them while we talked, she said. The file is updated. I'll send it to Mercer's team when I'm back at the terminal. How many do you think they'll catch? She thought about it honestly. 7, she said. Maybe 8. The others have been careful enough that their operational security will hold long enough for them to exfiltrate. We'll get them eventually, but not immediately. And the foreign buyers? That's a longer game, she said. Months? Maybe more. But we know the timeline now. 14 months with 2 specifications. We know their development pace. We know where they are in the process, which means we have time to move against them. We have time, she said, if the right people get the information to the right places. Is that going to happen? She thought about Mercer, about the IG office, about the file she had sent at 0812 hours to 2 recipients, one of whom was in a federal interrogation room with Stavros right now. Yes, she said, I think it will. Reynolds nodded. He walked out. Emily stood alone in row 7 for a moment. She looked at the empty box. She thought about Thomas Greer, who had found this thread 14 months ago and had been moved away from it and had waited and documented everything and had made a call that had started a process that had ended here in this room with a colonel in custody and a deputy director in custody and a foreign procurement network with a hole in it where the 3rd specification should have been. She thought about what she still didn't know. The foreign buyers, the development team, the 14 months, the threads that didn't end tonight. She picked up her tablet. She walked out of the archive. The work was not finished, but this part of it was. And that, for now, was what mattered. Fort Liberty. The interrogation of Colonel Richard Stavros lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Emily knew this because Mercer called her at 15:31 hours while she was still at the secure terminal on the 2nd floor of the operations building, still working, still pulling threads that hadn't fully resolved, still doing the things she did when the adrenaline of a concluded operation converted itself into the quieter, more sustained energy of work that wasn't finished. He talked, Mercer said. She stopped typing. How much, she said. Enough, a pause that carried weight. The foreign buyers are confirmed. The nation state is confirmed. The development timeline is confirmed. We have names 4 individuals on their end who are receiving and processing the data. We have a location for their development facility. She stopped herself from saying the word significant because it was insufficient. That changes the timeline considerably. It changes everything, Mercer said. The right agencies have been notified in the last 40 minutes. This has moved above our level. How far above? Considerably, he said. She understood what that meant. It meant rooms she would never be in, conversations she would never hear, decisions made by people whose names she would probably never know, acting on information that she had spent 6 weeks building from a single anomalous intercept on a Tuesday afternoon in December. She understood that this was how it worked. She had always understood that. It didn't make it easy, but it made it acceptable. The 11 network members, she said. 7 in custody as of an hour ago, Mercer said. 3 were still working. 1 has gone dark. 7, she had told Reynolds, 7, maybe 8. 7 was right. The one who went dark, she said. Do you have anything? A last known location and 48 hours of communication silence, Mercer said. We'll find him. I can help with that, she said. A pause on Mercer's end. Not a long pause, but a pause. Carter, he said, when did you last sleep? She looked at the clock. It was 15:31 hours. She had been awake since 0400 the previous morning. She had gotten 3 hours before the mission briefing, which meant she had been functioning on 3 hours of sleep for the past 31 hours. I'm fine, she said. I'm sure you are, Mercer said. Which is why I'm telling you that the one who went dark will still be dark in 6 hours, and the work you do in 6 hours will be sharper than the work you do in the next 30 minutes. Go sleep, Carter. We'll pick this up at 2200. She opened her mouth. That's not a suggestion, Mercer said. Go. She closed her mouth. She sat at the terminal for another 4 minutes, finishing the documentation thread she was in the middle of, because stopping in the middle of a documentation thread was not something she was capable of doing. Then she closed the terminal. She sat for a moment in the empty room, and for the first time since the transport vehicles had started down the mountain at 0347 hours that morning, she let herself be still. Not processing, not analyzing, not following threads, just still. The feeling that came into the stillness was not dramatic. It was not the rush of triumph or the heavy descent of exhaustion, or any of the things that she imagined people expected her to feel after a night like the one she had just been through. It was something quieter, something that felt, if she was being precise about it, like the specific relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has finally, in some partial and incomplete way, been able to set it down. Not permanently. She knew better than to think permanently. But for this moment in this room, she was allowed to be still. She stayed still for exactly 6 minutes. Then she went to find somewhere to sleep. She ran into Hayes in the corridor outside the medical wing. I was in a proper sling now, not the field dressing from the mountain, but a clinical brace that held his arm at the correct angle, the kind of thing that looked considerably more serious than a field dressing, and was paradoxically a sign that things were going to be all right rather than a sign that they weren't. Who was walking with the careful, deliberate gait of a man managing pain and not allowing it to show on his face more than necessary. He had also apparently finally eaten something. He was carrying a sandwich in his free hand with the particular reverence of a person for whom food has in the last few hours moved from background necessity to active comfort. He stopped when he saw her. Carter, he said. Hayes, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way people had looked at her in the briefing room yesterday morning, not the category assigning glance that placed her in a box and moved on. This was the look of someone who was still working out how to see her accurately and who understood that the process of working that out was going to take longer than a single conversation. How's the shoulder, she said. Torn labrum, he said. Ligament damage, 6 months minimum before I'm cleared for full duty. He said it plainly, the way you say things that are painful when you have made the decision to be plain about them. Which is, he stopped. Which is hard, she said. Yeah. He looked at the sandwich. Which is hard. She nodded. You have good instincts, she said. You noticed the low doors in building 2. You adjusted your overwatch plan. I got shot before I could use it, he said. You noticed it before anyone else did, she said. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. He looked at her. I mentioned it to you in the equipment room and you already knew. I identified the load doors from imagery, she said. You identified them from threat assessment. 2 different skills arriving at the same place. She paused. That's not redundancy. That's resilience. He was quiet for a moment. Building 4, he said. You mentioned building 4 in the equipment room. The position I hadn't flagged. You would have found it, she said. Maybe not in time, he said. She didn't respond to that. What you did last night, Hayes said carefully. 8 targets, 11 minutes. I know what that requires. I know exactly what it requires, the training, the hours, the particular kind of calm that... He stopped again. I just want you to know that I know, that it isn't lost on me. She looked at him. Thank you, Sergeant, she said. Mike, he said, off duty. Emily, she said. He nodded. She started to move past him. Emily, he said. She stopped. The thing you said to me on the mountain, he said, when I asked who took out the machine gun, and Reynolds told me it was you. You said, he paused, you said I noticed the load doors. I just got hurt before I could use the information. I remember, she said. That was generous, he said. You didn't have to say it. She considered this. I said it because it was true, she said. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard Hayes take a bite of his sandwich. It sounded, for some reason she couldn't articulate, like a profoundly human sound. She kept walking. She slept for 5 hours and 40 minutes. Not the light surface sleep of someone who can't fully release the tension of the preceding hours, but deep, complete. The kind of sleep that happens when the body has been running on something that isn't quite sustainable and has finally been given permission to stop. She woke up at 2201 hours, 60 seconds before her alarm. She lay still for a moment, oriented herself to the room, took 3 long breaths. Then she got up. She made coffee. She sat down with her tablet and opened the file on the one network member who had gone dark. His name was Vincent Calloway, 44 years old, former military intelligence, 12 years of service, followed by a transition into private contracting that Emily's analysis had traced into Iron Covenant's supply chain approximately 22 months ago. He was the 11th thread, the last one unresolved, the one whose communications had gone dark 48 hours before the mission and who had not surfaced since. Most people who went dark before an operation did one of two things. They ran, immediately packed a bag, and moved, understanding that the network was compromised and that their only viable option was distance. Or they stayed and waited, hidden, watching, trying to assess how much the other side knew before deciding whether running was necessary. Runners were easier to find. They made decisions under pressure, and pressure produced errors. They used familiar routes, contacted familiar people, reached for familiar comfort in unfamiliar circumstances. Waiters were harder. Waiters were patient. Waiters had prepared hiding positions and could sustain themselves indefinitely if they had planned properly. Calloway was based on everything Emily had read about him, a waiter, which meant he was still close, which meant he was watching. She set down her coffee and opened the base communication logs for the past 48 hours. Not looking for Calloway specifically, looking for the shape of something watching. She found it 47 minutes into the search. Not a communication, an access pattern. Fort Liberty's administrative building had a digital log of every access card swipe, every entry to every building, every corridor, every secured area. The system generated the logs automatically, and they were reviewed periodically by base security as a routine audit function. Nobody had reviewed them in the past 48 hours because the past 48 hours had been consumed by everything else. Emily reviewed them now. Calloway's base access pass, the one he had been issued as a contractor on a logistics contract that Emily had traced to the Iron Covenant supply chain, had been used 3 times in the past 48 hours. At times that corresponded precisely to windows when base security was at minimum staffing. He had not been accessing the buildings. He had been confirming that his pass still worked, testing the perimeter, watching from the inside. Emily called Reynolds. He answered on the second ring again. "Calloway is on base," she said. A short silence. "You're sure?" he said. "Access log shows 3 pass uses in the last 48 hours at minimum staffing windows." "He's not inside any building currently. The logs would show if he'd stayed inside. He's using the pass to confirm his access is still valid and then withdrawing." "He's going to make a move," Reynolds said. "He's been assessing whether to run or stay. If he's still testing his access, he hasn't decided yet." She paused. "Which means there's something here he hasn't been able to leave behind." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But whatever it is, it's more important to him than getting out clean. And that means it's something that matters to us." A pause. "I'll get the team," Reynolds said. "Not the team," she said. "Not yet. If Calloway sees a task force moving, he runs and we lose whatever he's staying for." She thought about it quickly. 2 people, you and me. We find out what he's here for before we move on him. Carter. If he's a waiter, he's calm. He's not going to do anything dramatic until he gets what he came for. We have a window. Reynolds was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Where do we start?" he said. "The access log shows he last pinged near the supply warehouse annex in the eastern sector. That's the building closest to the Iron Covenant logistics contract he was running through this installation." She was already pulling up the annex schematic. "If there's something here he wants badly enough to stay, for it's in that building." 20 minutes, Reynolds said. "Meet me at the East Motor Pool." She was already closing her tablet and picking up her jacket. She left the coffee untouched. 2003 hours. Supply warehouse annex eastern sector. The annex was quiet in the particular way of storage buildings at midnight. Not entirely still, because such buildings have their own ambient noise, but quiet enough that footsteps on concrete were audible from 30 feet away. Emily and Reynolds moved along the interior wall with their access cards and their radios on closed channel, and Emily had the access log on her tablet, showing Calloway's last known position accurate to the nearest corridor. Reynolds had a sidearm. Emily had the M2010 in the bag on her shoulder because she had not yet returned it to the armory, because some part of her had understood that the night might not be finished. She did not take it out. She was not going to need it in here. This was not a mountain. This was a building. And Calloway was not a fighter. He was an intelligence contractor who had made a choice that had put him in a network that had now collapsed around him, and who was right now somewhere in this building doing something that he believed was worth staying for. She needed to find out what it was. "Third corridor," she said quietly. The access log puts his last ping at the junction of Corridor 3 in the secondary storage wing. Reynolds moved forward. She followed. They found Calloway at 23:41 hours. He was not hiding. He was not armed. He was not doing anything that looked on the surface like the behavior of a man who had gone dark to evade a federal investigation. He was sitting on the floor of the secondary storage wing, with his back against a shelving unit, holding a tablet in his lap, and he was reading. He heard them coming. He looked up. He saw Reynolds first, then Emily. His face ran through several things in rapid succession: assessment calculation, a brief flash of something that might have been fear, and then something Emily had not expected. Relief, not complete relief, not the relief of a man who wanted to be caught. The relief of a man who has been waiting for something to happen and has found the waiting more exhausting than the thing itself. "I wondered when someone would find the access log," he said. His voice was tired in a bone-deep way. "Vincent Calloway," Reynolds said. "Yes." He looked at the tablet in his lap. "I'm not going to run." "I know," Emily said. He looked at her, a sharp look, the look of someone who has just heard something unexpected from an unexpected source. "You know," he said, "runners use their access pass once and don't come back." She said, "You've been coming back. That means there's something here that matters more to you than getting out clean." She looked at the tablet. "What's on it?" Calloway looked at the tablet for a long moment. 18 months ago, he said, Marcus Webb recruited me. He told me it was a domestic operations supply chain work for an organization trying to expose corrupt military contracting. He told me I'd be helping expose the people who were profiting from the system at the expense of the people deserving in it. A pause. I believed him. The room was quiet. "When did you stop believing him?" Emily said. 6 months ago, he said. "When I started seeing where the data was going, not domestic, not exposure, export." He looked up at her. "I tried to get out. Webb told me the exit required a final task. One more data transfer." A pause. I refused. And then Reynolds said, "And then Webb told me that if I didn't complete the final transfer, evidence of my prior involvement would be sent to federal authorities." He said it flatly without self-pity. "So I stayed. I couldn't get out, and I couldn't go forward. He stopped. "I've been in a corner for 6 months. Emily looked at the tablet. "What's on it?" she said again. "Everything," he said. She held his gaze. "I've been documenting since the day I tried to get out," he said. "Every transaction I was aware of, every name, every contact, every communication. I've been building a record." He paused. "Because I understood that eventually it was going to end. Either I was going to find a way to give this to someone who could use it, or I was going to be arrested, and I wanted to have something to offer." He held the tablet out to her. "I heard about last night. I heard that Webb was in custody and Hutchins was in custody, and I understood that the window had opened." Emily took the tablet. She looked at it. What she saw in the first 30 seconds of scrolling made her go very still. Because Calloway had not just documented his own involvement, only had documented the entire network from his vantage point inside the logistics chain. He had seen things that Emily had not seen from her position in the DIA analysis. He had names she didn't have, contact points she hadn't been able to trace, and most significantly buried in a transaction record from 11 months ago, a single name that appeared in one document in one line as the authentication signature on a data delivery confirmation. Not Stavros, not Hale, someone new. Someone whose name had not appeared anywhere in Emily's 6 weeks of analysis. Someone above Stavros in the network architecture. She stopped scrolling. She looked at Calloway. "Who is this?" she said. She turned the tablet to show him the name. He looked at it. "The principal contact," he said. "The one who was directing Stavros. I only saw the name once. I don't know if it's a real name or a cover identity, but it appears in that document as the receiving authority on the delivery confirmation." Emily looked at the name. She had never seen it before, and she knew every name in the Iron Covenant network. which meant this name was above Iron Covenant. It was the connection to the foreign buyers. The human connection, not a shell company, not a financial entity, but a person who had signed their name to a document inside a network they believed was airtight. The thread she had been looking for. Not thread 12, thread 1, the beginning of everything. Her hands were very steady when she closed the tablet. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I need you to come with us." He stood up. He did not argue. He did not negotiate. He picked up nothing from the floor because he had nothing to pick up. He had come to this building with a tablet and a decision that had been forming for 6 months and had finally arrived at its completion. "Am I under arrest?" he said. "You're being detained for questioning," she said. "What happens after that depends on a number of things, including what I just gave you." "Including that," she said. He nodded. "I know," he said. Reynolds called it in. 2 minutes later, 2 of Mercer's people were in the building. Calloway walked out between them without looking back. Reynolds watched him go. Then he looked at Emily. "The name on the tablet," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is it what I think it is?" She looked at him steadily. "It's the thread above Stavros," she said. "The connection to the foreign buyers. If it's verified," she paused, "it changes the entire picture of what we're looking at. The scale, the duration, the reach." Reynolds was quiet. "How long do you think this has been running?" he said. "Longer than Iron Covenant," she said. "Significantly longer. Calloway's earliest document is from 26 months ago. But the network architecture suggests it was operational before that." "Years," Reynolds said. "Years," she agreed. He ran a hand through his hair, the same unguarded gesture she had seen from him in the transport vehicle hours and a lifetime ago. "Carter," he said. "I know it," she said. "This is above our level. Significantly above our level." "I'm aware," she said. "I'm sending the tablet contents to Mercer tonight. What he does with the name is his decision and the decisions of people above him." She looked at the empty storage wing. "But we found it." Reynolds looked at her. "You found it," he said. "Calloway found it first," she said. "He just needed someone to give it to." Reynolds shook his head slowly, not negating what she'd said, just absorbing it. They walked out of the annex together into the cold night air. Behind them, the building was quiet again. Whatever had been hidden in it was hidden no longer. 3 weeks later, Fort Liberty. The days that followed Calloway's detention had a quality that Emily recognized from the aftermath of every major operation. She had been part of a kind of institutional decompression, the gradual return of normal rhythm to people and places that had been operating at an abnormal pitch. Martinez came back from medical leave walking with a slight limp that the doctors said would fully resolve within 3 weeks. And he walked into the team room and Tran said, "Finally," in it. Martinez said, "Miss me?" And Tran said, "Not even a little," in a tone that said the exact opposite. Hayes was doing his physical therapy with the particular aggressive compliance of a man who had decided that if he was going to be told to do something, he was going to do it better than anyone expected. His therapist, by all accounts, found him exhausting. Hayes found the therapist insufficiently ambitious. Kowalski's forearm had healed cleanly. He had not mentioned the shrapnel again and did not appear to plan to. Reynolds had submitted the after-action report. Emily had not read it in full, but Reynolds had told her the day he submitted it that he had described her role accurately and completely, including the M2010 and the 8 targets, in the 11 minutes and 40 seconds, in the sniper evaluation program, and all of it, every part of it, that was not classified above the report's distribution level. "Accurately and completely," she had said. "Accurately and completely," he had confirmed. "How many people pushed back on it?" she said. 3, he said. 2 from the DIA side who had concerns about the protocol deviations. 1 from my own chain of command who wanted a different characterization of your role." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the report was accurate," he said, "and that I would be submitting supplementary documentation if any revision was requested." She had looked at him. "Supplementary documentation," she said. "Describing in detail what happened when the machine gun was active and the team sniper was down and there was no other long-range option," he said. "I thought the contrast between the documented situation and any version of events that characterized your role differently might be instructive." She said, "You used me as a deterrent." "I prefer accurate contextual framing," he said. "But yes." She had not been able to entirely prevent the small, genuine smile that crossed her face at that. Hale remained in federal custody pending formal charges. His attorney had filed 3 separate motions in the first 2 weeks, all of which were denied. Stavros had continued talking. The interrogations produced, according to Mercer, considerably more than the initial session, a full picture of the network's architecture, the foreign buyer's acquisition priorities, and enough technical detail about the autonomous targeting development program to allow 3 separate agencies to develop response options. The name from Callaway's tablet had been verified within 72 hours. It was a real name. It belonged to a real person. What happened after that verification was above the level of any room Emily had been in, and she had accepted that, and she had gone back to work. Because that was what she did. The meeting that Reynolds had requested took place on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week in a conference room that was not Conference Room B. Conference Room B had been allocated for a different briefing that morning, and Reynolds had, with what Emily recognized as deliberate symbolism, chosen the small room at the end of the 2nd-floor hallway instead, the one that fit exactly 6 people without chairs to spare. He had asked her to come. He had also asked Okafor, Hayes, Tran, Kowalski, and Martinez. The whole team. Emily arrived to find everyone already there. Martinez was in the chair nearest the door, his leg extended slightly. Tran was beside him. Hayes was in the corner, with his arm in the brace that he wore with the resigned dignity of a man who had accepted something he couldn't change and had decided to change everything else instead. Kowalski had brought coffee for everyone, which was the most unmistakably Kowalski thing Emily had observed him do. Okafor was standing near the window, which was where Okafor stood when the chairs were taken. Reynolds was at the head of the table. He looked at Emily when she came in, and the look had the quality that she had learned to read from him over the course of 3 weeks, direct, real, no performance attached. "Thank you for coming," he said to the room. "I know everyone has places to be, so I'll keep this short." The room settled. 3 weeks ago, Reynolds said, this team inserted into an operation that had been compromised before we ever left this base. We were sent into a trap by people inside the system we were serving. We took casualties. We almost lost people. He paused. We didn't. We completed every primary objective. We found a network that reached farther than anyone expected. We brought it down. He paused again. That happened because every person in this room did their job completely and without breaking. He looked at each of them in turn. Martinez, Tran, Kowalski, Hayes, Okafor, then Emily, including someone who was not in the official mission roster as a combatant, he said, and who did what she did without recognition, without credit, and without asking for either. Emily looked at the table. Carter, Reynolds said. She looked up. I want you to know officially in front of this team that what you did on that mountain saved every life in this room, and what you did in the hours afterward changed the outcome of an intelligence investigation that had been running for over a year. He paused. You are the reason the right people have the right information right now. You are the reason 11 people are in custody and 1 network is dismantled and 1 connection to a foreign procurement chain has a name attached to it. The room was quiet. I also want you to know, he said, that I submitted a commendation request to your supervisory chain at DIA, not because you asked for it, because the record should reflect what happened. He paused, accurately and completely. Emily looked at him. She thought about what she wanted to say and what she actually needed to say and whether those 2 things were the same. Thank you, Major, she said. Daniel, Reynolds said. The room shifted slightly, not dramatically, just the small, real shift of a formality being set aside by mutual recognition. Thank you, she said. Daniel. Martinez said, can we talk about the fact that she pulled a sniper rifle out of a laptop bag? Tran said, it wasn't a laptop bag. It looked like a laptop bag, Martinez said. It was a gear bag, Tran said. You can tell the difference if you... I could not tell the difference, Martinez said. I'm saying it looked like a laptop bag. I'm saying I was standing next to her on the mountain, and I did not know she had a long-range rifle in a bag that looked like a laptop bag. To be fair, Kowalski said, none of us knew. Okafor knew, Hayes said. Everyone looked at Okafor. Okafor looked out the window. Okafor, Reynolds said. I had a reasonable suspicion, Okafor said carefully. House Tran said. The weight distribution of the bag, Okafor said, and the way she carried it close to the body balanced. Not the way you carry a laptop bag. He paused. And the way she moved during the equipment check before insertion. There are specific movements people make when they are accounting for equipment they have not disclosed. You could have said something, Reynolds said. I could have... Okafor agreed. Why didn't you? Okafor turned from the window and looked at Reynolds with the particular serenity of a man who had made a decision long before this conversation and was comfortable with it. Because if I was wrong, I would have created an awkward situation based on an inference about a colleague's undisclosed equipment, he said. And if I was right, he paused. Then we were going into a compromised operation with an additional asset that nobody knew about, which is in retrospect exactly what the situation required. The room was silent for a moment. Then Martinez said, "You're telling me that you knew and you kept it to yourself because you thought we might need her." "I thought the situation might require more than the official plan accounted for," Okafor said. "I was correct." Martinez looked at Okafor, then at Emily. "I have been in this unit for 4 years," he said. "I have never felt as uninformed as I do right now." "Welcome to intelligence work," Emily said. The room laughed. It was the first genuine, uncomplicated laughter that had been in any room Emily had shared with these people, and it had a quality that she recognized as something specific. The laughter of people who have been through something serious together and have arrived at a moment where the seriousness doesn't own them anymore, where they can put it down briefly and breathe. It lasted about 15 seconds. Then Reynolds said, "Carter," and the room settled again. "There's something I want to ask you directly," Reynolds said, "and I want a direct answer." "All right," she said. "The DIA is going to want to reassign you," he said. "After the action, after the commendation, after the Hale investigation, your profile inside the agency has changed. They're going to have a different idea of where you should be and what you should be doing." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "My formal request," he said, "was for you to be permanently attached to Task Force Sentinel in an intelligence support capacity." He paused. "Not as a combatant, not as a line operator, as what you actually are, the best intelligence analyst I have ever worked with a set of additional capabilities that I now understand and that I will never again fail to account for." She looked at the table. She looked at the team. Martinez, who had just made her laugh. Tran, who had held his position under fire and not broken. Hayes, who had stood in the equipment room and listened to her talk about load doors and had taken her seriously when most people would not have. Kowalski, who had bled quietly on a forearm for 4 hours without mentioning it. Okafor, who had known and had waited and had been right about what the situation required. And Reynolds, who had told her to stay behind the desk and then watched her walk off the edge of every assumption he'd carried into the mission, and who had not spent 1 second of the 3 weeks since then pretending the assumptions had been anything other than wrong. She thought about what she wanted. She had spent so long operating alone, carrying the things she was hiding it in the background, making herself useful without being seen, being the person in the corner of the room that nobody looked at twice, that the question of what she wanted had become over years, something she had trained herself not to ask too directly, because wanting things created expectations. And expectations in her experience were what got people hurt. But she was 31 years old and she had spent the last 3 weeks in the company of people who had looked at the full truth of who she was, not the analyst, not the title, not the category, and had not flinched. She looked at Reynolds. "Yes," she said. Reynolds nodded. "Good," he said. "Then welcome to Task Force Sentinel." Hayes said, "Officially this time?" Tran said, "As opposed to unofficially saving all of our lives." "Same outcome," Martinez said. "Better paperwork." Kowalski put a coffee in front of her. She looked at it. Then she looked around the room at the people who had been strangers to her 3 weeks ago and who were something else now. Something she did not have a precise word for, but understood with the same bone-deep clarity she brought to everything. She picked up the coffee. She held it. She didn't say thank you again. She didn't make a speech. She wasn't someone who made speeches. She was someone who did the work, who followed the threads, who stood in the corner of rooms and watched what everyone else missed and was ready, absolutely ready, when the moment required something more. The something more had been required. She had been ready. And now, for the first time in a very long time, she was somewhere she did not have to hide what she was. Not because the world had changed, not because the threat had ended. The network's foreign buyers were still out there. The 14th-month timeline was still running. The name from Calloway's tablet was still the subject of an investigation that would take months and involve rooms she would never see. There was more work. There was always more work, but she had a team now. And a team, she understood, was not a luxury. It was a force multiplier. Emily Carter, who had never wanted recognition, who had never wanted her name known, who had spent years operating in the space between what was seen and what was real, sat with her coffee in a room full of people who knew exactly who she was. And she was, for the first time in longer than she could precisely remember, exactly where she was supposed to be. The quiet analyst in the corner of the room had never been hiding from the battle. She had been waiting for the right one. She had found it, and she was not done yet.